The night stretches endlessly, an abyss filled with quiet whispers of humanity's deepest fears. Somewhere, a candle flickers in a dim room, throwing shadows that dance across crumbling walls. In that small, fragile light, the human heart beats in its universal rhythm alone, anxious, yearning. This is where our journey begins, in the raw universality of pain, loneliness, and doubt that touches every life. Consider Karl Marx, not yet the figure of revolutionary doctrine, but a young man walking through the streets of Trier, observing the stark contrasts around him, the laborers bent beneath the weight of unyielding toil, children running barefoot through mud and stone, and the distant glow of wealth that never touched their hands. Even then, he sensed the imbalance, the silent suffering that threaded every human existence. He would later write of it in letters, capturing not only economic injustice, but the existential despair that accompanies a life of quiet oppression. But Marx's awareness was not born in isolation. Philosophers before him, thinkers like Hegel, had glimpsed the patterns of history, the ebb and flow of human consciousness. Hegel's dialectic suggested that life moves through conflict, that change is born from contradiction. Yet for young Marx, these ideas were not abstract, they were lived, experienced in the furrows of the worker's brow, in the empty stomachs of children, in the muffled sorrow of women whose lives were invisible to history's grand narrative. In every corner of the world, across centuries, similar stories unfolded. Think of the letters of Virginia Woolf, expressing the quiet suffocation of expectation and the yearning for freedom from the invisible chains of societal roles. Or the journals of Galileo, where brilliance collided with fear, and the pursuit of truth became a lonely, almost dangerous pilgrimage. These are the seeds of understanding, that suffering, even when silent, shapes the soul, carving channels through which the light of insight may someday flow. Imagine a man trudging home after a 12-hour day, the damp night pressing against his back, each step echoing the rhythm of exhaustion and quiet despair. In that very moment, the potential for revolution, both personal and societal, stirs, like a dormant ember. Change begins not as a roar, but as a whisper. The awareness of injustice, the spark of curiosity about why life is ordered as it is, the fragile hope that another way might exist. These are the first tremors of transformation. Pain and despair are not mere obstacles, they are teachers. They reveal the fragility of existence, the precariousness of comfort, and the inevitability of mortality. Every letter Marx wrote, every conversation he had, every observation of the struggling masses carried this truth, that human life, in its most vulnerable state, demands attention. It cries out for recognition, understanding, and eventually, for action. In this space between suffering and awareness, the journey begins. We will follow thinkers, leaders, and visionaries, tracing how they confronted the abyss of despair and found within it the seeds of hope. We will listen to speeches that shook nations, read documents that dared to imagine justice when none seemed possible, and immerse ourselves in the intimate struggles that define the human condition. And yet, even as we dwell in sorrow, there is a subtle warmth. It is the recognition that pain connects us. It reminds us of our shared humanity. It is the quiet voice that tells us, you are not alone. Others have felt this too. Others have struggled. Others have transformed. In this shared understanding lies the first flicker of hope, the knowledge that human life, despite its fragility, is not without purpose. Let your mind linger on these images. The exhausted laborer, the solitary thinker, the quiet candle flickering in a dark room. Listen to the soft echoes of history, the unrecorded sighs, the letters never sent, the dreams almost forgotten. In this quiet space, the stage is set for change. Marx's philosophy of history and society begins here. In these intimate, unspoken moments, he observed that suffering is not static. It interacts with consciousness. It provokes thought, reflection, and eventually transformation. It is in these first tremors, the private awakenings of the heart and mind, that the possibility of change, both personal and collective, emerges. As your eyelids grow heavy, let the stories mingle in your mind. Let the lives of those who suffered, struggled, and observed the world in all its contradictions drift alongside your own thoughts. Feel the universality of the human condition, the pain, the doubt, the yearning for meaning, and in that shared recognition, let a subtle warmth arise, the promise that the night, no matter how dark, can contain the seeds of a dawn yet to come. For every tear shed, for every silent sigh, there is a story waiting to transform despair into understanding, helplessness into resolve, and suffering into the first breath of hope. This is the beginning, a descent into the raw, unflinching universality of human emotion, where every struggle carries within it the potential for awakening, and every life, no matter how obscure, contributes to the grand narrative of change. The world is quiet now, yet beneath the stillness, life trembles. Every heartbeat is a testament to impermanence, every breath a fragile victory against time's relentless passage. In this silence, we confront what humans have always feared most, the transience of our existence, the uncertainty of tomorrow, the knowledge that nothing endures. Karl Marx understood fragility not merely as physical vulnerability, but as a condition imposed by society. The laborer in the industrial cities of 19th century Europe carried not only the weight of the body, but the burden of a system designed to exploit that very weight. The fragile human life, finite, precious, and easily broken, became a lens through which Marx observed the structures of inequality. He saw mortality intertwined with injustice, how suffering is amplified when survival itself is never guaranteed. The fragility of existence is not limited to social conditions. It is woven into the very fabric of human consciousness. Philosophers from every era have asked the same haunting questions. Why do we suffer? Why is life so fleeting? Why must joy always be shadowed by sorrow? In the private writings of Blaise Pascal, these questions emerge repeatedly. He noted that human beings are a thinking reed, fragile yet conscious, aware of their vulnerability and yet daring to dream. Every reflection, every hesitation, echoes with the tension between insignificance and meaning. Consider the letters of soldiers from long-forgotten wars. Their words, scratched hastily on paper, revealed the precariousness of life in a world governed by forces far beyond their control. Each sentence is heavy with awareness, the certainty that existence is fleeting, the terror of being powerless, the ache of longing for safety and recognition. These letters, though centuries old, resonate today because fragility is timeless. It is the human condition in its rawest form. Marx observed that this fragility is not random, it is shaped by social structures, economic pressures, and the relentless march of history. In his early writings, he reflected on the alienation of the worker, the disconnection from the product of their labor, from fellow humans, and ultimately from themselves. This alienation magnifies fragility, for it erodes meaning and exposes the soul to despair. Human life is most vulnerable when it is ignored, exploited, or rendered invisible by the very society that claims to sustain it. Yet within fragility lies a paradoxical strength. The awareness of mortality can awaken wisdom, empathy, and courage. It forces reflection, demanding that one confront the fleeting nature of comfort, love, and even life itself. Every philosopher who pondered existence to Socrates in his prison cell, contemplating the end with calm reason. Simone de Beauvoir, questioning freedom and responsibility in the shadow of mortality. Or Marx, witnessing the fragility of workers' lives reveals a shared insight. That understanding fragility is the first step toward transcending it. Imagine a young child, curled beneath a threadbare blanket, hearing the wind whistle through broken window panes. Their fragility is evident, yet within it exists curiosity, imagination, and resilience. The fragility of existence is not merely a source of despair. It is also the crucible in which the human spirit is tempered. Every experience of vulnerability carries the potential for insight, compassion, and eventually transformation. History is filled with those who have confronted fragility head. Leaders who rose amidst social collapse, writers who penned their truths under threat of persecution, and ordinary people whose lives, though brief or overlooked, altered the trajectory of communities. Each of these lives is a testament to the delicate yet potent force that arises when awareness of mortality meets courage and purpose in contemplating fragility. We are drawn toward reflection, toward the quiet spaces where truth emerges. The letters Marx wrote to friends reveal this deeply human dimension, a recognition of suffering. Yes, but also a call to observe, to analyze, to understand the conditions that make life so perilously fragile. In doing so, he laid the foundation for a philosophy that would seek not only to describe the world, but to change it, to safeguard the dignity of existence against the relentless forces of neglect and exploitation. As your mind slows and the shadows of night deepen, consider the fragility of your own life not as a source of fear, but as an invitation to awareness. Each breath, each thought, each moment of reflection is a reminder of how precious and finite existence is. In the delicate balance between despair and consciousness, between mortality and hope, the human soul begins to recognize its capacity for courage, insight, and action. Fragility, in the end, is a mirror. It reflects both our vulnerabilities and our potentials, revealing that life's fleeting nature is inseparable from the wisdom it can teach. As we continue this journey through Marx's philosophy of change, we carry with us the understanding that the fragility of existence is not a weakness to escape, but a reality to embrace her. Reality that compels us to think, feel, and ultimately to act in this quiet contemplation. The stage is set for the next step, understanding how suffering born of fragility and inequality shapes the human spirit, forging resilience, insight, and the first spark of transformative hope. There is a heaviness that hangs over human life, an invisible gravity that presses against every heart, every mind, every fleeting moment of joy. This weight is suffering, a constant, patient teacher, unyielding and relentless, shaping the contours of our consciousness. Without it, there would be no depth, no insight, no awakening. It is suffering that forces us to see, to feel, and ultimately to understand. Karl Marx observed suffering not only as an individual burden, but as a social phenomenon. In the factories and mines of 19th century Europe, the laborer's body and spirit were pressed into the service of others' profit. Yet this suffering was more than physical. It was the erosion of identity, the alienation from one's own labor, and the isolation from fellow humans. Marx recognized that such oppression carried a dual force. It inflicted pain, yes, but it also revealed the structures of society, exposing the fault lines where injustice thrives. Consider the personal letters of those who endured hardship silently. The words of Frederick Douglass, once enslaved, describe nights of fear and days of relentless labor. Yet within his narrative is a profound recognition. Suffering, though crushing, becomes a lens through which the human spirit sees the possibilities of liberation. Every injustice, every wound, every deprivation becomes part of a larger story, a story in which resilience and awareness are born. Suffering is a teacher that refuses to be ignored. Philosophers, poets, and visionaries alike have recognized its transformative potential. Nietzsche, in his reflections on human endurance, called suffering a forge. It burns away illusion and leaves the essential truth of life exposed. Tolstoy's characters wrestle with pain and loss, emerging not unscathed, but awakened to moral insight and the depth of human connection. Marx, too, understood this principle, not in abstract moral terms, but in the tangible reality of lives constrained by poverty, labor, and social inequity. Imagine a woman walking home after a long day of toil. Her hands raw, her back aching, her spirit weighed by the unspoken struggles of survival. In her solitude, she reflects, silently questioning the world and her place within it. It is in these moments, when suffering presses hardest, that the first flicker of insight often arises. The human spirit, confronted with adversity, begins to perceive patterns, to understand causes, to recognize the possibility of change. Suffering, however, is not evenly distributed. Some bear burdens they never sought, while others live in relative ease. This asymmetry is at the heart of Marx's philosophy of change. The structures of society dictate not only opportunity but the very conditions of struggle. Those who suffer most acutely often develop the clearest perception of injustice. Pain, in this sense, is a teacher of truth. It reveals the hidden mechanisms of power, the invisible chains that constrain human potential, and the urgency of transformation. Yet the weight of suffering is not purely intellectual. It is visceral, intimate, and unavoidable. The grief of losing a loved one, the anxiety of unmet needs, the quiet despair of a life constrained by circumstance, these experiences are universal. They carve the soul, shaping character, empathy, and the capacity for compassion. In the letters of historical figures, from imprisoned revolutionaries to exiled poets, one hears this dual nature of suffering. It is both burden and guide, oppressor and mentor. Consider the story of a small village, where famine and disease leave lives shattered. Yet the community gathers to share what little they have. In their collective endurance, there is a profound lesson. Suffering, when faced together, can cultivate resilience, solidarity, and an understanding that the human spirit is neither solitary nor fragile. It is relational, enduring, capable of profound empathy. Marx's insight lies in connecting individual suffering with systemic forces. Personal pain, when contextualized within social structures, becomes a call to consciousness. It is no longer mere misfortune, but a signal that change is necessary, that awareness is imperative, that action is the path toward liberation. The human soul, heavy with suffering, becomes fertile ground for revolutionary thought, As your mind drifts slowly in this quiet reflection, allow yourself to sense the weight of suffering, not as a burden to resist, but as a presence to understand. Let it mingle with the stories of those who endured before, whose pain became wisdom, whose struggle became insight. Every trial, every sorrow, every quiet moment of despair carries within it the seeds of resilience, the spark of awareness, and the potential for transformative change. The weight of suffering is both a shadow and a guide. It presses upon us, reminding us of mortality, inequality, and vulnerability. Yet it also illuminates the path toward understanding, compassion, and purpose. Within this tension lies the first stirrings of hope. The realization that pain is not the end is the beginning of insight, courage, and ultimately liberation in the stillness of the night. With the flickering candle casting long shadows, the human spirit confronts suffering in its purest form. It is here, in these intimate encounters with pain, that Marx's philosophy of change takes root, a recognition that awareness arises from struggle, that transformation emerges from hardship, and that even the heaviest burdens carry within them the potential for insight, resilience, and action. Freedom, the word carries the weight of centuries, echoing through streets, prisons, and silent chambers where hearts longed for escape from the chains of oppression. It is a cry that begins quietly, often inaudible, yet persistent and insistent whisper that refuses to be ignored. Karl Marx heard this cry not as a mere abstraction, but as the heartbeat of society, the collective pulse of those whose lives had been constrained by the rigid structures of power. Consider the laborer in an industrial city, shackled not by iron but by economic necessity. Each day the same oppressive routine, each hour a mirror of confinement, each moment a reminder of unfulfilled potential. Yet within this relentless cycle, a spark of awareness emerges, the recognition that life could be otherwise, that suffering is neither natural nor inevitable. The cry for freedom begins here, in the quiet resistance of the human mind against systemic injustice. History is filled with voices that articulated this yearning. Frederick Douglass, who escaped the bondage of slavery, spoke not only of personal emancipation, but of the broader struggle for human dignity. His speeches resonate with the tension between despair and hope, illustrating the courage required to confront entrenched systems of oppression. Similarly, the writings of Sojourner Truth, Toussaint Louverture, and other revolutionary figures reflect the universal nature of this yearning, a relentless demand that human life be recognized as valuable, autonomous, and free. Marx understood that freedom is not given, is claimed, fought for, and often won at great cost. The revolutions of 1848, the uprisings across Europe, the countless acts of resistance by workers, women, and marginalized communities, all testify to the human instinct to reject subjugation. These struggles are more than political, they are profoundly personal, rooted in the very desire to live with dignity, to think freely, and to shape one's own destiny. The cry for freedom is also intimate. In letters smuggled from prison cells, in journals hidden under floorboards, in whispered conversations at night, the oppressed expressed their desire for self-determination. These personal acts of defiance, though small in isolation, accumulate into a powerful current that can reshape the course of history. Marx's philosophy emphasizes this connection, that collective action grows from individual awareness, that social transformation emerges from the aggregation of personal courage and insight. Freedom is rarely neat or immediate. It carries risk, sacrifice, and suffering. Consider the story of a young revolutionary, arrested for speaking out against injustice, standing in the silence of a cold cell. The fear is palpable, yet so is resolve. Each choice, each act of defiance reverberates beyond the individual, inspiring others and planting the seeds of systemic change. This is the essence of Marx's vision, that the struggle for liberation is continuous, shaped by both courage and circumstance, and fueled by an unwavering belief that oppression is not eternal. Even in moments of despair, the cry persists. Women chained by societal expectations, workers burdened by poverty, entire communities silenced by political oppression, all these voices converge in an invisible chorus, demanding recognition, justice, and autonomy. Marx perceived this convergence as both the source of historical momentum and the moral imperative for action. The cry for freedom is not a passive longing, it is a force that drives thought, galvanizes movements, and challenges entrenched power. Philosophers, poets, and leaders alike have grappled with the meaning of freedom. Rousseau wrote of natural liberty, Kant of moral autonomy, and Marx of collective emancipation. Each perspective adds depth to the understanding that freedom is multidimensional, political, social, economic, and deeply personal. The human spirit, when confronted with constraint, responds with resilience, imagination, and the relentless pursuit of possibility in the quiet of the night. As your mind drifts toward contemplation, imagine the countless lives whose whispers became roars, whose resistance became revolution. Feel the weight of courage, the tension of risk, the exhilaration of claiming autonomy. The cry for freedom is universal, timeless, and unyielding. It is the heartbeat of humanity reaching toward its potential. This cry, however, is not merely a historical phenomenon. It is alive in every human experience, manifesting as the desire to transcend limitation, to seek justice, and to affirm one's dignity. In observing this, Marx drew a profound conclusion. Freedom is inseparable from struggle. Liberation is not granted. It is achieved through awareness, action, and solidarity. As you breathe slowly and sink deeper into reflection, let the stories of those who fought, suffered, and persisted resonate. Let the whisper of their courage stir within you a subtle recognition that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit resists, seeks, and ultimately reaches for freedom. This is the next step in our journey, the emergence of hope, the first flicker of transformation that arises when awareness meets courage. From the spark of hope, a fire emerges. It begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet it grows in intensity, fueled by struggle, determination, and the relentless refusal to surrender. Karl Marx understood resilience as the human response to suffering and injustice, the force that transforms pain into purpose, and awareness into action. Consider the lives of workers in 19th century Europe. They faced unrelenting hours, meager wages, and the constant threat of illness or injury. Each day could have crushed the spirit entirely, yet many endured not passively, but with a quiet resolve that became the foundation of collective strength. This resilience was not simply stoic acceptance. It was active engagement with the world, an inner fire that burned despite external oppression. Resilience, as Marx saw it, is both personal and social. The individual who survives hardship gains insight and strength, but the collective that perseveres can ignite systemic change. The letters of revolutionaries, clandestine meeting records, and journals of workers all reveal this dual nature. Every act of endurance, no matter how small, contributes to a broader awakening. Pain becomes fuel. Struggle becomes momentum. Hope, once sparked, becomes a sustaining force. Throughout history, extraordinary figures demonstrate this transformation. Consider Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for decades, yet emerging with a resolve that not only transformed his own life, but reshaped a nation. Or consider the countless anonymous workers who organize strikes, refusing to accept exploitation, building solidarity even when every step risked retaliation. In each story, resilience manifests as a fire persistent, consuming obstacles, illuminating paths previously unseen. Marx's philosophy emphasizes that resilience is not born in comfort. It emerges through confrontation with adversity, through intimate encounters with suffering and inequality. The worker who labors under oppressive conditions, the thinker who challenges dominant ideologies, the oppressed community that organizes in secrecy, all embody resilience as both survival and defiance. It is through this fire that human consciousness is sharpened, insight is deepened, and action becomes inevitable. Imagine a woman rebuilding her life after the loss of home and family in a natural disaster. The physical and emotional pain is immense, yet each day she rises, tending to small tasks, nurturing hope and connecting with others who share her plight. This is resilience in its purest form, the courage to continue, to endure, and to transform suffering into meaningful action. Marx recognized that this resilience, multiplied across communities, becomes the engine of social change. Philosophical insight deepens the understanding of resilience. Nietzsche describes suffering as a forge that tempers character, while Tolstoy depicted hardship as the crucible through which empathy and moral insight emerge. Marx integrated these reflections with social reality. Resilience is not merely internal fortitude. It is the conscious response to structural oppression, a recognition that survival alone is insufficient and that transformation demands both endurance and engagement. The fire of resilience is also generational. Letters, memoirs, and oral histories capture the transmission of courage and determination from one generation to the next. Knowledge of past struggles, awareness of historical victories and defeats, provides the raw material for renewed resilience. It is in this continuum, the interaction between past suffering and present action, that the potential for meaningful change is sustained. As your mind drifts into quiet reflection, feel this fire within. Sense the accumulation of human courage, the weight of endurance, the quiet determination that refuses to be extinguished. The fire of resilience is invisible yet palpable, shaping not only individuals but communities, societies, and movements. It is the force that converts despair into action, vulnerability into strength, and hope into tangible possibility. This fire, once ignited, prepares humanity for greatness. It illuminates paths previously obscured by fear, oppression, and doubt. It teaches that struggle is not wasted, that suffering can be harnessed, and that transformation is always possible when resilience guides thought and action. From this fire, the next stage emerges, the call to greatness, where revolutionary thinkers and visionaries harness the lessons of suffering and resilience to challenge conventions, break chains, and redefine destiny. Greatness does not arrive silently. It calls, often in whispers at first, then with increasing insistence, demanding attention, courage, and commitment. Karl Marx understood this call as both personal and historical, a summons that arises when awareness, hope, and resilience converge, compelling individuals to act not just for themselves, but for humanity. History offers countless examples. Consider Marx himself, who, through observation, study, and deep reflection, saw the mechanisms of inequality and the potential for systemic change. His writings were not abstract theories alone, they were calls to consciousness, challenges to ordinary people and leaders alike to perceive oppression and to act upon it. Greatness, in Marx's conception, is inseparable from moral and intellectual courage. Visionaries throughout history have answered this call in diverse ways. Leonardo da Vinci, isolated yet relentless, pushed the boundaries of art, science, and understanding, leaving a legacy that transcends time. Abraham Lincoln, facing a nation torn apart, answered with decisiveness and moral clarity, guided by the knowledge that human dignity must be preserved. Rosa Luxemburg, too, exemplified the call to greatness, her words and actions reflecting the courage to challenge entrenched powers despite personal risk. Each demonstrates that greatness emerges from the intersection of insight, courage, and the willingness to confront injustice. Marx's philosophy emphasizes that the call to greatness is not reserved for the privileged. It arises wherever human consciousness encounters contradiction and suffering, where oppression, inequality, and alienation demand recognition and response. The worker who organizes for fair treatment, the writer who exposes systemic corruption, the activist who risks freedom for justice, all are heirs to this call. Greatness, in this sense, is the purposeful translation of awareness into transformative action. Letters, speeches, and historical documents reveal the intimate struggles behind the pursuit of greatness. The handwritten note of a revolutionary planning clandestine meetings, the manifesto drafted in candlelight, the essay published despite censorship reflect the tension between personal risk and historical responsibility. These documents, preserved across time, illuminate the universal truth that greatness is forged in the crucible of challenge and propelled by unwavering commitment to principle. Philosophical and spiritual traditions reinforce this insight. Aristotle spoke of virtue as the realization of human potential. Confucius emphasized moral rectitude and service to society. Hegel envisioned history as the unfolding of human consciousness toward freedom. Marx synthesized these ideas into a revolutionary vision. Greatness is not merely individual achievement, it is the conscious transformation of society. The elevation of human life through collective insight, courage, and action. The call to greatness often arrives in moments of crisis. A nation on the brink, a community oppressed, a movement stifled, all create the conditions for extraordinary human initiative. Those who answer do not do so lightly. They confront fear, uncertainty, and the weight of historical consequence. Yet in answering, they illuminate a path for others, demonstrating that courage and vision are contagious, capable of reshaping societies and inspiring generations. Imagine the young revolutionary, standing at the edge of uncertainty, feeling the enormity of what must be done. The weight of expectation presses upon them. Yet a deeper voice, the call to greatness, whispers, insistently, you have the capacity to act, to change, to lead. This is the threshold moment where insight, resilience, and hope converge, compelling action that echoes far beyond the individual. The call to greatness is inseparable from responsibility. To answer is to acknowledge the suffering of others, to recognize systemic injustice, and to commit to action that elevates collective humanity. It is a call that transcends ambition or self-interest. It is a summons to contribute to the ongoing project of human liberation, understanding, and flourishing As you breathe slowly and sink deeper into reflection, feel this call resonate within you. It is subtle yet persistent, urging awareness, courage, and creativity. The lives of those who have answered before philosophers, revolutionaries, leaders, and ordinary people demonstrate that greatness emerges not from circumstance alone, but from the deliberate choice to confront, transform, and inspire. The human spirit is a force, both delicate and immense, a current that runs unseen yet shapes history, guides action, and ignites transformation. Karl Marx observed this spirit not as an abstract ideal, but as a tangible reality. The collective awareness, resilience, and courage of individuals that, when combined, challenge oppression, redefine societies, and alter the course of human destiny. Consider the great movements of history. The workers' uprisings in 19th century Europe, the suffrage movements across continents, and the civil rights struggles of the 20th century all testify to the astonishing strength of the human spirit when individuals unite toward a shared purpose. Each movement began with awareness, sparked by injustice, nurtured through resilience, and ultimately magnified by collective will. Marx recognized that this collective consciousness is the engine of social change, and the human spirit, when mobilized, becomes unstoppable. Letters and memoirs from participants reveal the intimate reality behind these movements. A worker describes the exhaustion of a 14-hour day, yet persists in union meetings to demand fair treatment. A mother writes secretly of educating her children despite systemic neglect, planting seeds of hope and empowerment. These acts, seemingly ordinary, reveal the extraordinary power of the human spirit, persistence in the face of adversity, courage in the face of fear, and the unwavering belief that change is possible. Philosophers and visionaries have long reflected on this capacity. Emerson spoke of self-reliance as the foundation of individual and collective strength. Thoreau emphasized conscience and moral courage as transformative forces. Marx synthesized these insights within a material and social framework. The human spirit gains its true power when individuals recognize systemic oppression and act in solidarity to overcome it. It is a spirit both reflective and active, capable of envisioning new possibilities and striving to make them real. The human spirit also thrives in moments of near impossibility. Consider communities rebuilding after war or disaster, inventors persisting despite repeated failure, or activists risking imprisonment to demand justice. In each case, ordinary people manifest extraordinary strength, demonstrating that resilience and courage are not rare gifts but inherent potentials. Awakened by awareness and purpose, Marx emphasized that this spirit is inherently social. It flourishes in solidarity, in shared struggle, in collective hope. While individual courage is vital, it is the convergence of many hearts and minds, unified by shared awareness of injustice and vision of change, that transforms society. Movements gain momentum when the human spirit is recognized as a communal force, capable of overcoming obstacles far larger than any one person. Imagine the scene of 1,000 workers marching, chanting, and organizing despite exhaustion and risk. Each step is heavy, each voice measured, yet collectively they form a rhythm that shakes foundations and inspires awe. This is the human spirit in motion, persistent, disciplined, and magnified by unity. Marx observed that such collective expression is not spontaneous alone, it is cultivated through awareness, education, and shared vision. The power of the human spirit lies also in its creativity. Art, literature, science, and philosophy emerge from the tension between limitation and aspiration. Beethoven composing symphonies in increasing deafness, Marie Curie advancing science despite social barriers, or Langston Hughes giving voice to marginalized communities, all exemplify the transformative energy of the human spirit. In each instance, adversity fuels innovation, suffering sparks reflection, and the pursuit of meaning amplifies impact. As you reflect quietly, allow this recognition to sink in. The human spirit, though often challenged, persists. It is resilient, courageous, and capable of profound collective action. It carries the weight of awareness, the momentum of hope, and the drive of resilience, forging paths that once seemed impossible. This spirit is the cornerstone of Marx's philosophy, the recognition that humanity, through consciousness and solidarity, holds the power to reshape itself and its world. Life is defined by moments of choice. Some pass unnoticed, others alter the course of individual lives, and still others shape the destiny of nations. Karl Marx understood history itself as the cumulative effect of such choices, moments where awareness, resilience, and moral courage confront uncertainty, risk, and consequence. It is in these tense intersections that the potential for profound transformation is realized. Consider the revolutions of 1848 across Europe. Individuals and communities faced stark decisions: to act against oppression or remain complicit, to risk imprisonment, injury, or death for justice, or to accept the status quo. The tension was palpable. Each choice carried immense weight, for the outcome was uncertain, the stakes colossal. In letters, speeches, and manifestos of the time, one senses the anxiety, deliberation, and hope that defines such pivotal moments. The decisions of ordinary individuals, multiplied across society, became catalysts for history itself. Choices are seldom purely rational. They are suffused with emotion, fear, and hope. Marx observed that the oppressed, when confronted with systemic injustice, navigate this tension constantly. A worker choosing to join a union, a student deciding to speak out against inequality, or a thinker committing words to paper despite censorship, are examples of human courage, emerging in the crucible of uncertainty. Each decision, though personal, ripples outward, influencing the collective trajectory of communities and societies. History is full of moments where tension defined outcomes. Abraham Lincoln, deliberating the fate of a divided nation, faced decisions that could either preserve or shatter democracy. Rosa Parks, by refusing to relinquish her seat, confronted systemic injustice with a choice that resonated far beyond the bus where it occurred. Each instance reveals a universal truth: human agency, exercised at critical junctures, can redirect the flow of history. Marx's philosophy highlights this interplay between structural forces and individual decision, showing that while conditions constrain choices, awareness, courage, and solidarity can bend outcomes toward justice. The tension of choices also manifests in moral dilemmas. Philosophers, writers, and leaders have long explored this terrain. Dostoevsky's characters wrestle with ethical ambiguity and consequence. Kant emphasized the necessity of principled action, and Marx illustrated that social structures create both limitations and opportunities for ethical engagement. Life, he argued, is a series of choices where the conscious recognition of oppression and the moral imperative to act intersect with uncertainty and risk. Imagine the solitary figure standing before a decision that will affect countless others. Fear presses down like a physical weight. Uncertainty clouds the mind. And yet a flicker of resolve emerges, a commitment to justice, a refusal to ignore suffering. This is the tension of choice, the recognition of stakes, the awareness of consequence, and the courage to act in alignment with values and vision. Every such moment is both intimate and historical, shaping not only the individual but the collective human journey. The tension intensifies when choices are interdependent. Social movements, revolutions, and reforms rely on the convergence of countless individual decisions. A single act of courage inspires another. One instance of solidarity ignites a chain of transformative action. Marx emphasized that systemic change is not spontaneous. It emerges from the aggregation of deliberate choices made under tension, informed by awareness, resilience, and hope. As you reflect in quiet contemplation, sense this tension within your own life. Every moment of decision, from the mundane to the monumental, carries potential for growth, insight, and transformation. The weight of consequence, far from paralyzing, can sharpen awareness, strengthen resolve, and illuminate the path toward meaningful action. There are moments in life when everything feels poised to unravel. The world tilts on a fragile axis, and hope seems distant, almost unreachable. Karl Marx recognized these aegis not as abstract metaphors, but as the lived reality of individuals and societies confronting systemic oppression, personal betrayal, and near impossible odds. It is at the precipice of collapse that the human spirit is most profoundly tested, where courage, awareness, and resilience meet their ultimate challenge. Consider the workers trapped in factories during the Industrial Revolution. Subjected to dangerous conditions, meager wages, and unrelenting hours. Many faced exhaustion, illness, and despair that could have crushed the body and mind entirely. Yet, in the quiet defiance of organizing clandestine meetings or sharing knowledge about labor rights, resilience persisted. History records these moments as critical junctures, edges where collapse threatened. Yet human determination refused to yield entirely. Collapse is not only physical but moral, emotional, and social. The betrayal of trusted allies, the exhaustion of collective movements, and the repeated setbacks in political struggle all push individuals and communities to their limits. Marx understood that these trials, while destabilizing, reveal both vulnerability and potential. In letters smuggled from prison, memoirs hidden under beds, and journals documenting resistance, one can trace the delicate balance between despair and perseverance, a tension that defines the edge of collapse. History amplifies this dynamic. The failed revolutions, abandoned uprisings, and disbanded movements that litter the annals of human struggle are reminders that collapse is never merely theoretical. Consider the Paris Commune of 1871, where hope, courage, and vision clashed with brutal suppression. Thousands sacrificed their lives, yet even in defeat, their courage became a beacon for future movements. Marx observed that collapse is not the end, but a moment pregnant with lessons, the potential to rebuild, rethink, and reignite the fight for justice. Personal narratives echo this truth. A young revolutionary, imprisoned and isolated, faces betrayal from those they trusted most. Their physical and emotional exhaustion is immense. Yet even in these moments, subtle sparks of awareness endure, reflections on past victories, observations of societal injustice, and the quiet resolve to act when opportunity returns. These near-failure moments are crucibles, forging clarity, courage, and insight that only adversity can produce. The edge of collapse also reveals the interdependence of human endeavor. Communities, families, and movements demonstrate resilience when individuals support one another, sharing strength and purpose amid despair. Marx emphasized that collective endurance is vital. Collapse is most dangerous when isolation prevails. Solidarity, even small and fragile, provides the scaffolding upon which recovery and transformation can be built. Philosophers and visionaries have long noted the transformative power of confronting collapse. Nietzsche described the abyss as both terrifying and illuminating, a place where one confronts limits and discovers hidden capacities. Tolstoy's characters often face existential crises that redefine moral clarity and purpose. Marx integrated these insights into a social framework. Collapse, when met with awareness and solidarity, becomes a precursor to systemic insight, collective action, and eventual triumph. Imagine standing at a literal or metaphorical precipice, where the weight of suffering, betrayal, and uncertainty threatens to consume everything. The air is heavy, the ground unstable, and yet a subtle force persists, a reminder of the resilience within, the lessons learned from struggle, and the potential for transformation that lies just beyond the brink. As your mind absorbs these reflections, recognize that collapse is never the final verdict. It is a threshold, a testing ground, and a catalyst. The edge of collapse sharpens awareness, intensifies courage, and clarifies purpose. It is here, in proximity to despair, that the seeds of recovery and triumph are sown. After the long nights of struggle, the weight of suffering, and the edge of collapse, there comes a subtle shifter moment when momentum changes, when effort and perseverance begin to yield results. Karl Marx understood history as punctuated by these turning points, instances where awareness, resilience, and collective action converge to alter the trajectory of human life. The tide turns, often quietly at first, before sweeping through communities, societies, and nations. Consider the labor movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Workers had endured decades of exploitation, injuries, and poverty. Strikes, protests, and the formation of unions were initially met with violence and repression. Yet, through persistence and solidarity, incremental victories emerged: better wages, improved working conditions, recognition of rights. These victories, small in isolation, accumulated into a historical turning point, demonstrating the power of collective resolve. Turning points are rarely dramatic at their inception. They begin as subtle changes: the adoption of a new idea, a single act of courage, or the alignment of circumstances that amplify previous efforts. Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat was a singular act, yet it ignited the civil rights movement, setting into motion a wave of legal, social, and cultural change. Marx emphasized that structural transformation often begins with such seemingly modest acts, which, when supported by awareness and solidarity, become irreversible forces. The tide turning is also deeply emotional. It carries relief, hope, and renewed purpose. Letters, speeches, and memoirs reveal the human side of these moments. A worker writes of triumph after years of struggle. A mother reflects on opportunities now available for her children. An activist witnesses laws changed, systems reformed, and communities empowered. The emotional resonance is profound. Victory is not merely procedural but deeply human, affirming dignity, courage, and perseverance. Philosophically, turning points highlight the interplay of agency and structure. Marx saw that individuals and communities act within constraints. Yet through awareness, strategy, and collective determination, these constraints can be bent, redefined, or broken. History is not predestined. It is shaped by the deliberate actions of those who recognize injustice, commit to transformation, and harness the power of solidarity. Every tide that turns carries the imprint of human initiative as well as the lessons of past struggle. Even in moments of triumph, tension persists. Reversals, opposition, and new challenges remind us that change is never absolute. The turning of the tide is not an endpoint, but a transition, recalibration of forces. A reminder that awareness, resilience, and courage must be sustained. Yet these moments illuminate possibility, confirming that effort, vision, and solidarity can overcome even entrenched systems of oppression. Imagine a community witnessing the first signs of victory after long years of organizing. The air is electric with anticipation, the quiet victories resonate like drumbeats, and the collective spirit swells. This is the turning of the tide, the cumulative power of hope, resilience, and courage manifesting as tangible change, altering not only circumstances, but perception, belief, and ambition. Marx emphasized understanding these moments is critical. By studying the tides of history, its reversals, triumphs, and strategies, humanity gains insight into the mechanisms of change. The turning of the tide teaches that struggle is never wasted, that resilience is rewarded, and that the human spirit, when united and purposeful, is capable of overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. As you reflect, feel the subtle shift within yourself. Recognize the power of accumulated effort, the quiet victories that illuminate progress, and the momentum that builds from persistence. This turning is both external and internal. Society moves forward, and the individual spirit grows stronger, emboldened by the realization that change is possible. There is a peculiar stillness that falls before dawn. Darkness is absolute, the weight of night oppressive, yet it is, in this very darkness, that transformation quietly prepares to emerge. Karl Marx recognized these moments in history, the seemingly hopeless periods when despair is greatest, when systems appear unyielding, and when the human spirit is tested beyond measure. These are the moments before dawn, the threshold between struggle and breakthrough. Imagine a society teetering on the brink, workers exhausted, communities fractured, leaders imprisoned, hopes deferred. Every setback seems permanent, every effort futile. The human heart grows weary. The mind questions the value of persistence. It is here, in the silence of near defeat, that the seeds of transformation are most powerfully sown. Marx observed that such periods, though emotionally and socially agonizing, are pregnant with possibility. The depth of darkness prepares the consciousness for the light to come. The moment before dawn is also deeply personal. Consider the writer laboring on revolutionary ideas, risking persecution with every word, who pauses to contemplate failure and isolation. Or the activist who has faced repeated betrayal and violence, yet feels the quiet stirrings of resolve within. The darkness amplifies fear, yet it simultaneously sharpens awareness, the recognition of injustice, the understanding of systemic failure, and the subtle realization that persistence is the precondition of transformation. History bears witness to these moments. The imprisoned Nelson Mandela, held in isolation for decades, faced despair daily, yet his resolve, deepened by reflection, prepared him to guide a nation toward reconciliation. The civil rights movement in America experienced repeated setbacks, violence, arrests, and political obstruction. Yet each challenge strengthened communal strategy, solidarity, and vision. The pre-dawn moment is when adversity consolidates insight, turning individual suffering into collective preparedness. Philosophers and thinkers describe this period as a necessary precursor to breakthrough. Nietzsche's abyss is not merely a void but a space for reflection and emergence. Hegel's dialectic requires contradiction before resolution. Marx emphasizes that systemic change requires the full recognition of oppression before it can be effectively transformed. Darkness is not absence, it is preparation, awareness, and the silent accumulation of strength. Even in the smallest, most intimate experiences, this moment appears. A family on the verge of poverty clings to one another, unaware that aid or opportunity may soon arrive. A solitary student, exhausted by study and despair, senses the possibility of understanding just beyond the current struggle. The moment before dawn is universal. It exists in history, society, and the individual spirit. It is a quiet pause, heavy with potential, between collapse and breakthrough. Emotionally, this period is intense. Fear, uncertainty, grief, and frustration swirl together, pressing upon the human heart. Yet within these forces lies a subtle guidance. Resilience, hope, and moral clarity coalesce here. The lessons learned from suffering, struggle, and resistance align, preparing the individual and the collective for decisive action. It is as if the darkness itself is an instrument, shaping the perception, courage, and vision necessary for transformation. As your mind drifts into reflection, sense the tension of this pre-dawn moment. The night may feel endless, yet the very stillness, the quiet preparation, carries the promise of change. Awareness deepens, resolve strengthens, and hope, though fragile, begins to whisper. In Marx's vision, these moments are critical. They precede every turning of the tide, every revolutionary leap, every triumph of human spirit over circumstance. Dawn breaks quietly at first, a subtle glow along the horizon, a gentle illumination that dispels the darkness of night. Karl Marx saw these moments in human history, the culmination of struggle, resilience, and awareness, when the light of transformation finally pierces through oppression and despair. The arrival of light is not merely a metaphor. It is the tangible realization of change, the moment when effort, courage, and solidarity converge to create new possibilities. Imagine a society after decades of hardship. Workers who endured exploitation now see their rights recognized. Communities that suffered systemic neglect witness the emergence of opportunity and justice. Individuals whose courage was tested find validation and affirmation in collective triumph. The light arrives gradually, yet its presence is unmistakable. Warming hearts and inspiring renewed vision. The arrival of light is deeply emotional. Letters from those who lived through transformative periods such as the abolition of slavery, the victories of civil rights movements, or the enactment of social reforms, reveal relief, joy, and cautious optimism. The light does not erase struggle, nor does it negate past suffering, but it illuminates the path forward, revealing the possibilities that perseverance and resilience have created. Marx emphasized that the light of transformation is inseparable from human agency. Awareness of oppression, hope nurtured in darkness, resilience forged through struggle, and the deliberate choices of individuals and communities all coalesce to make change visible. History is shaped not by inevitability alone, but by the courage and insight of those who act upon it. The arrival of light is the materialization of conscious effort and collective determination. Philosophical traditions underscore this insight. Hegel's dialectic reveals the emergence of progress through conflict and synthesis. Nietzsche's affirmation of life highlights the creative power that follows suffering. Emerson celebrates self-reliance and moral clarity. Marx synthesizes these threads into a vision where the material and social realities of struggle align with human consciousness to produce tangible change. Light, in this sense, is both symbolic and practical. It illuminates understanding, enables action, and affirms possibility. Even the most ordinary moments reveal the significance of this arrival. A mother witnessing her child attend school for the first time, a worker experiencing fair treatment for the first time, or a community celebrating the recognition of long-denied rights all reflect the human impact of light breaking through darkness. These instances, while personal, are part of a broader historical narrative where resilience and collective effort reshape conditions for generations. Emotionally, the arrival of light is a mix of relief, wonder, and cautious optimism. It validates struggle, honors endurance, and signals the capacity of human spirit to overcome adversity. It is a reminder that suffering, when met with awareness and action, is not wasted. It becomes the foundation upon which transformation is built. The light does not eliminate challenge, but empowers humanity to navigate it with greater clarity and confidence as your mind settles. Imagine this illumination spreading softly, persistently, and irrevocably. Feel the warmth of possibility, the subtle encouragement of hope realized, and the affirmation of human potential actualized. The light of transformation confirms that resilience, courage, and solidarity are not abstract ideals but forces capable of tangible change. Discovery is a celebration of consciousness. It is the exhilarating realization that something previously unknown, whether an idea, a truth, or a possibility, can now be understood, embraced, and acted upon. Karl Marx recognized discovery not merely as scientific or intellectual achievement, but as a deeply human experience, emerging from the intersection of struggle, resilience, and the pursuit of liberation. Imagine the worker who, after years of exploitation, gains insight into the mechanisms of economic inequality. Suddenly, what was opaque becomes clear. The structures, dynamics, and forces shaping daily life are understood. Knowledge transforms perception into power, despair into possibility. In this moment, awareness itself becomes an act of emancipation, and discovery is both deeply personal and socially consequential. History is replete with such moments. Scientific breakthroughs, artistic innovations, and philosophical insights have often emerged from struggle and perseverance. Marie Curie's experiments, fraught with danger and societal bias, culminated in discoveries that illuminated the natural world and expanded human capability. Leonardo da Vinci's sketches and studies revealed layers of understanding previously unimagined, transforming art, anatomy, and engineering. Marx emphasized that the joy of discovery is intertwined with human effort, the recognition that labor, reflection, and courage create new knowledge and new possibilities. Discovery is not limited to intellect. It is emotional, spiritual, and moral. The abolition of slavery, the recognition of civil rights, the formation of social systems that respect dignity, all are discoveries in human conscience. Moments when society realizes that justice, equality, and compassion are achievable. These revelations, once experienced, are irreversible. They alter perception, inspire action and elevate collective potential. Letters, memoirs, and first-hand accounts capture the intimate essence of discovery. The diary of a revolutionary witnessing a law passed after years of activism. The reflections of a scientist publishing findings that challenge conventional wisdom. The private writings of philosophers contemplating social transformation or reveal the joy and gravity of realization. Discovery illuminates not only understanding but responsibility. Insight compels engagement. Knowledge calls for action. The joy of discovery is also creative. In art, literature, and invention, the human spirit expresses newfound awareness, giving form to insights that inspire, provoke, and elevate. Beethoven composed symphonies that expressed previously unimaginable emotional landscapes. Tolstoy penned narratives that illuminated moral and social truths. Writers and thinkers challenged dogmas, expanded human empathy, and deepened collective understanding. Each act of creation embodies the joy of discovery, recognition of hidden potential made manifest emotionally. This joy is profound. It brings relief, exhilaration, and a renewed sense of purpose. Discovery validates struggle, affirms resilience, and opens the horizon of possibility. It teaches that knowledge and insight are not mere abstractions, but tools for transformation, capable of reshaping individual lives and entire societies. As your mind drifts into contemplation, imagine the subtle thrill of insight emerging from effort and observation. Feel the warmth of understanding, the excitement of connection, and the gentle satisfaction of uncovering truth. In Marx's vision, the joy of discovery is both reward and catalyst. It celebrates what has been achieved and propels humanity toward further exploration, innovation, and liberation. Unity is the harmony of purpose, the convergence of diverse lives, experiences, and efforts toward a shared vision. Karl Marx recognized unity as the culmination of awareness, resilience, and discovery, the moment when individual insight transforms into collective strength, and shared struggle becomes a source of profound fulfillment. Imagine a community long divided by hardship, exploitation, or oppression. Through effort, solidarity, and mutual understanding, they begin to align, recognizing common goals and shared humanity. In this alignment, differences are acknowledged but do not fracture purpose. Collaboration becomes the vehicle for transformation, and every individual contribution strengthens the whole. Marx understood that such unity is not mere idealism, it's practical, strategic, and transformative. History provides vivid examples. The civil rights movement in the United States achieved monumental victories through the coordinated efforts of countless individuals, each contributing skills, courage, and vision. Labor movements gained momentum when workers across regions united, recognizing shared challenges and pooling collective strength. Even revolutionary change, as Marx observed, depends on the ability of communities to perceive their common interests and act in solidarity. Unity amplifies impact, turning isolated acts into movements capable of reshaping societies. Letters, speeches, and manifestos often capture the emotional intensity of unity. A worker writes of pride in collective action. A community celebrates shared victories after prolonged struggle. Activists reflect on the strength drawn from solidarity. Unity is both a practical and deeply emotional phenomenon, creating bonds that sustain morale, fuel resilience, and nurture hope even in adversity. Philosophically, unity resonates with the recognition of interconnectedness. Hegel emphasized the unfolding of collective consciousness. Emerson celebrated the synergy of individual and community. Marx rooted unity in material conditions, showing how shared struggle and collective action transform both consciousness and reality. Unity is not passive conformity. It is an active, conscious alignment of effort and vision that multiplies impact and deepens fulfillment. The joy of unity is also celebratory. Gatherings, rituals, and shared achievements remind communities of their strength and potential. The collective triumph over systemic injustice, the realization of rights long denied, or the successful pursuit of social and political reforms elicits a profound sense of belonging and purpose. Unity validates effort, honors resilience, and transforms shared struggle into collective pride. Emotionally, unity nurtures hope and perseverance. It creates a space where diversity of thought, experience, and talent converges, allowing challenges to be met with ingenuity, courage, and solidarity. In Marx's framework, such cohesion is essential for systemic change. Isolated actions may falter, but coordinated, conscious collective effort can reshape structures, challenge power, and build lasting progress as your mind reflects. Sense the harmony of effort, the alignment of purpose, and the emotional resonance of shared achievement. Unity is the bridge between individual insight and collective transformation. The acknowledgement that human potential is magnified when consciousness, courage, and action converge. It is both celebration and preparation, reinforcing the strength required for further growth, discovery, and fulfillment. Completion is not merely an ending, it is a culmination of experience, insight, and reflection. Karl Marx recognized that wisdom emerges not in isolation but through the totality of struggle, awareness, resilience, and collective action. To reach completion is to understand the arc of effort, the lessons of adversity, and the continuity of human endeavor. Perceiving life not as fragmented moments, but as an interconnected cycle of experience. Imagine a life or a society that has endured hardship, navigated crises, celebrated discovery, and achieved unity. Completion arrives not with fanfare, but with quiet understanding. One perceives the patterns of struggle and triumph, the interplay of individual agency and collective force, and the significance of each choice and effort. Marx emphasized that this wisdom is grounded in material reality, knowledge of structures, relationships, and historical processes illuminates the forces shaping existence and provides the foundation for ethical, deliberate action. The wisdom of completion carries a profound emotional resonance. Letters and memoirs from those who have witnessed the arc of transformation often reveal serenity, reflection, and a sense of fulfillment. A worker who fought for decades for rights. A philosopher whose ideas influenced generations. A community that survived systemic oppression expressed the quiet contentment that comes from recognizing purpose realized and lessons learned. Completion honors the struggle itself, acknowledging that even failures and setbacks contribute to understanding and growth. Philosophical traditions align with this perspective. Aristotle spoke of eudaimonia, the flourishing that arises from a life fully lived and fully examined. Confucius emphasized reflection and moral insight gained through experience. Marx extended these insights into the social and historical realm. Wisdom emerges not solely from personal contemplation, but from understanding and engaging with the dynamics of society, labor, and collective struggle. Completion is the recognition of both personal and communal journey, the integration of experience into understanding, completion also requires acceptance. Mortality, impermanence, and the inevitability of change are not sources of despair, but of insight. Marx acknowledged that social systems, like individuals, evolve and transform. Awareness of these processes cultivates perspective and ethical responsibility. Wisdom of completion entails understanding that life's cycles suffering and joy, oppression and liberation, despair and hope are perpetual, and that fulfillment arises from embracing this continuity rather than resisting it. The human element of completion is deeply relational. Communities, families, and societies reflect on their collective experiences, transmitting lessons, stories, and values to future generations. In these acts of transmission, the wisdom of completion becomes enduring. It informs subsequent action, nurtures awareness, and strengthens resilience, ensuring that the insights born from struggle persist beyond individual lives. Emotionally, completion is liberating. It brings a sense of resolution, quiet satisfaction, and clarity of purpose. It transforms the cumulative weight of struggle into understanding, perspective, and vision. In Marx's framework, this wisdom is both reflective and practical. It enables conscious participation in shaping future social conditions while honoring the legacy of past efforts. As your mind settles, sense the profound equilibrium of completion, awareness refined, courage tempered, hope realized, and solidarity recognized. This stage is a pause for reflection, a moment to integrate experience into understanding, and a threshold for the cyclical return of human emotions and endeavors. Completion illuminates the rhythm of life, preparing the spirit for reflection, renewal, and the continuing pursuit of collective and individual transformation. Life is a rhythm, a cycle of experiences that rises and falls like tides upon the shore. Karl Marx recognized that human existence is not linear but cyclical, where joy follows sorrow, discovery succeeds struggle, and hope is reborn from despair. The emotional cycle returns repeatedly, revealing the dynamic, living nature of human consciousness and society. Consider the revolutions and reforms that have punctuated history. A movement achieves victory, rights are recognized, and communities celebrate. Yet, challenges inevitably arise, and new systems evolve, injustices resurface, and new struggles emerge. This cycle mirrors individual experience as well. Moments of elation give way to hardship. Reflection follows action, and insight follows failure. Awareness of this rhythm is central to Marx's vision. It cultivates patience, resilience, and readiness for the challenges that will inevitably recur. The emotional cycle is deeply human. Letters, diaries, and memoirs reflect this perpetual return. A worker celebrates a hard-won right, yet later confronts new inequities. A thinker experiences intellectual breakthrough, then wrestles with fresh uncertainty. Communities recover from oppression, only to face renewed obstacles. Each repetition carries the weight of memory and the potential for adaptation, showing that human experience is both continuous and evolving. Philosophically, cycles provide perspective. Hegel's dialectic emphasizes conflict and synthesis. Nietzsche highlights eternal recurrence. Eastern philosophies describe the unbroken rhythm of life and rebirth. Marx integrates these insights within material and social realities. The cycles of struggle, adaptation, and transformation are shaped by both human agency and structural conditions. Understanding this rhythm allows for more conscious engagement with life, enhancing resilience, foresight, and ethical responsibility. emotionally. Recognizing the return of cycles tempers despair and tempers elation. Awareness that life's highs and lows are transient fosters equanimity, preparing the individual and society to respond with insight and purpose rather than reaction. It teaches that every moment, whether of triumph or suffering, carries significance, and that both are necessary for growth, understanding, and collective progress. The cycle also reinforces connection. Shared experience of struggle, resilience, and renewal binds individuals and communities together. Generational transmission of stories, values, and lessons ensures that the wisdom born of previous cycles informs present action, enabling humanity to navigate recurring challenges with greater awareness and solidarity. Marx emphasized that this collective memory, rooted in lived experience, sustains movements, nurtures social consciousness, and fuels the ongoing pursuit of justice. Imagine the human spirit as a vast ocean, each wave representing moments of joy, despair, struggle, and insight. Some waves rise, some crash, some retreat, yet all are part of a continuous, interconnected rhythm. To recognize this rhythm is to align oneself with life's natural flow, harnessing its energy for reflection, action, and transformation. As your mind rests in contemplation, sense the inevitability and beauty of these cycles. Every return of emotion, challenge, and insight is not repetition without purpose, but an opportunity for renewal, understanding, and refined action. The emotional cycle reminds us that life is an ongoing dialogue between suffering and joy, action and reflection, awareness and transformation. The future is a vast, uncharted expanse, simultaneously inviting and intimidating. Karl Marx recognized the tension inherent in the unknown. The suspense of what is yet to come challenges human consciousness, tests collective resolve, and compels ethical and deliberate action. The future is neither predetermined nor passive. It is shaped continuously by awareness, choice, and the power of human agency. Imagine standing at a precipice, looking toward horizons unseen. Possibilities abound, some bright and transformative, others shadowed with uncertainty and risk. Societies, communities, and individuals alike confront this suspense. Will justice prevail? Will oppression endure? Will innovation uplift or destabilize? Marx observed that the uncertainty of the future is not paralyzing if approached with awareness and solidarity. It is, instead, a call to action, a prompt for courage, and a canvas for imagination. History offers examples of suspense in action. The Industrial Revolution introduced unprecedented technological and social shifts, some liberating, some oppressive. Political revolutions carried unknown outcomes, sometimes yielding justice, sometimes chaos. Activists, thinkers, and leaders have continually confronted these uncertainties, making choices that reverberate across generations. The suspense of the future is inseparable from human action. It is both challenge and opportunity. Emotionally, the future is a delicate balance of anxiety and hope. Letters, diaries, and memoirs from historical figures reveal this duality. Scientists anticipate discoveries while fearing failure. Revolutionaries plan uprisings while aware of repression. Communities strive for equity while uncertain of the outcome. This tension, the thrill of potential coupled with the weight of uncertainty, is central to human experience, shaping resilience, creativity, and foresight. Philosophically, suspense is fertile ground. Hegel's dialectic implies that contradictions in the present drive development toward synthesis in the future. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence prompts reflection on choices and consequences. Marx situates suspense within material and social conditions, showing that awareness, strategy, and collective effort actively shape what is yet to unfold. The future is dynamic, contingent upon both individual agency and systemic forces. The suspense of the future is also ethical. Decisions made today, how societies structure labor, allocate resources, or protect rights affect generations yet unborn. Awareness of this temporal responsibility fuels moral consideration, strategic thinking, and collective planning. Marx emphasized that knowledge of systemic conditions, combined with conscious, cooperative action, empowers humanity to navigate uncertainty with purpose rather than passivity. Imagine the world as a vast theater of potential, with countless stories waiting to unfold. Each choice, each act of courage, and each reflection contributes to the script of the future. Suspense is not merely anticipation. It is active engagement with possibility, the recognition that humanity co-authors the unfolding of history. The unknown, when approached with consciousness and solidarity, becomes a source of empowerment rather than fear. As your mind rests in contemplation, feel the energy of possibility. The suspense of the future calls forth awareness, courage, and imagination. It reminds us that human action, grounded in understanding, resilience, and solidarity, can shape destiny, turning uncertainty into opportunity, risk into transformation, and vision into reality. Eternity is not merely the endless passage of time. It is the enduring resonance of human effort, consciousness, and spirit. Karl Marx envisioned a fulfillment that transcends individual lives, a legacy of awareness, solidarity, and action that persists through generations, shaping the material and moral trajectory of humanity. The happiness of eternity is the profound satisfaction that arises from knowing that struggle, courage, and insight have contributed to the continuous unfolding of life's potential. Imagine a world in which the collective human spirit, informed by awareness and sustained by solidarity, achieves harmony between aspiration and action. Communities flourish, knowledge is shared, rights are recognized, and creativity and innovation illuminate every corner of human endeavor. The happiness of eternity is the recognition that these achievements, though impermanent in daily life, leave an indelible imprint on history. Ideas endure, influence spreads, and lives are transformed across time. This happiness is deeply emotional. Letters, memoirs, and reflections from those who witness change reveal a sense of fulfillment that surpasses material reward. The worker who saw justice achieved, the thinker whose ideas shaped generations, the activist whose courage inspired millions, all express a serenity and joy rooted not in possession or fame, but in contribution, impact, and enduring legacy. Marx's philosophy emphasizes that this form of happiness is collective as much as it is individual. It arises from connection, collaboration, and shared pursuit of justice. Philosophically, eternity intertwines with human consciousness. Hegel spoke of history as the realization of freedom. Emerson celebrated the moral development of the individual within society. Marx grounded this eternal happiness in material and social reality, asserting that fulfillment arises when human effort aligns with collective well-being, justice, and progress. Eternity, in this sense, is a celebration of influence, ideas, actions, and struggles that transcend the immediacy of life and ripple outward indefinitely. The happiness of eternity also honors the cyclical nature of existence. joy and sorrow, struggle and triumph, despair and hope, these elements continue to flow through generations. Yet within this rhythm, humanity learns, grows, and contributes to a legacy that outlasts individual experience. In embracing this cycle, individuals and communities recognize the timeless value of awareness, courage, resilience, and solidarity. Emotionally, this eternal happiness carries peace, gratitude, and profound fulfillment. It is the culmination of the journey, the awareness that each effort, each sacrifice, and each act of insight contributes to the larger tapestry of human progress. It is the quiet joy of knowing that life, with all its challenges and triumphs, participates in something greater than itself, a continuum of influence, understanding, and transformation that will persist beyond the confines of the present moment. Imagine the collective, human spirit as a constellation of lights stretching across time. Each act of courage, discovery, solidarity, and creativity shines brightly, forming a luminous pattern that guides generations yet unborn. This is the happiness of eternity, the knowledge that existence, struggle, and achievement resonate far beyond individual life, contributing to the infinite unfolding of possibility, justice, and human flourishing. As your mind rests in this reflection, feel the profound serenity of eternal impact. Recognize the enduring resonance of human effort, the timeless influence of ideas, and the joy inherent in participation within the great continuum of existence. In Marx's vision, the happiness of eternity is both celebration and affirmation, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, inspire, and transform the world across time. And so, the journey concludes full of struggle, reflection, discovery, unity, suspense, and ultimately, timeless fulfillment. The cycle of life continues, yet within every individual and society, the potential for awareness, action, and enduring influence remains eternal. Hey guys! Tonight we step into the flickering shadows of old Europe, where cobblestones echo under your boots and the sharp scent of ink and pipe smoke floats on the evening air. You're walking the narrow alleys of Trier, a sleepy little Prussian town nestled beside the Moselle River, where the street lamps seem more interested in flickering out than lighting your way. Somewhere in the distance, church bells ring melancholic and faint, like a bedtime lullaby with a hint of doom. In this quiet town, a boy named Karl is wide awake. And you, somehow, are right there beside him. He's sitting by the hearth, ink-stained fingers gripping a quill, muttering Latin verbs to himself, while his father, a stern lawyer with a penchant for Enlightenment philosophers, paces behind him. You catch glimpses of shelves lined with books, Voltaire, Rousseau, constacked like kindling for a fire that hasn't quite been lit yet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Are you on your 5th cup of tea or already half asleep? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You see, little Karl's world is not exactly built for dreaming. Born in 1818, just after Napoleon's smoke had cleared, he grows up in a family that straddles contradiction. His dad is a converted Jew who now practices Protestantism less out of piety, more for professional survival. Trier is under Prussian rule, and the monarchy doesn't take kindly to anything that smells remotely like other. And you're just tagging along quietly as Karl's life unfolds like an uneasy symphony violins of intellect. cellos of restlessness. At school, Karl is a bright student with an appetite for poetry, which you quickly learn is both charming and deeply cringeworthy. One poem he pens to a girl named Jenny includes the phrase, "My angel, my all, myself," which sounds more like an AI-generated love letter than anything a teenager should write. But hey, at least he tried. The young Marx isn't particularly political yet. That comes later. For now, he's obsessed with writing dramatic plays in the style of Goethe and Shakespeare. Tragic kings, fallen empires, star-crossed lovers. Imagination keeps running several revolutions ahead of reality. At home, things are less theatrical. His father Heinrich is strict but intellectual, a man who believes reason and reform can make the world better. He reads Voltaire aloud while sipping wine, and you sit across the room, slightly confused but nodding like you get it. Meanwhile, Karl absorbs all of it. You can feel the mental wheels turning behind those sharp young eyes. One rainy afternoon, as you sit with Karl under a leaking porch, he blurts out something about injustice, something about how it's strange that a farmer breaks his back all day and eats stale bread, while a banker drinks champagne at noon. It's just a thought, passing like storm clouds, but it lingers in the air. You don't realize it then, but this porch-muttering teenager will one day write words that make empires nervous. Historians still argue whether Marx's earliest leanings were more romantic than revolutionary. Some say he was just another moody teen, scribbling odes to rebellion without any real plan. Others insist his resentment of inequality was baked into his bones before he could even spell bourgeois. Here's something quirky. Karl's favorite. Myth as a child wasn't about gods or heroes, it was Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from Zeus and got eternally punished for it. Young Marx admired that. He once wrote that all gods must be destroyed in man's consciousness. So, bedtime thoughts for a 9-year-old. As you lay on the creaky guest bed in the Marx household, you listen to the wind howl through cracked windows and the whisper of ideological seeds being sown. Outside, the town sleeps. But inside this boy's head, battles rage between wealth and poverty, loyalty and freedom, tradition and something yet unnamed. Karl's mother, Henriette, is warm but often anxious. She worries about Karl's intensity, his fits of insomnia, and his tendency to read by candlelight until dawn. Sometimes you hear her murmur prayers in Yiddish after he storms off in frustration. There's something prophetic and painful about watching a mother realize her son might not be just another lawyer or priest, but someone who will set fire to systems she barely understands. By the time Karl is a teenager, Trier itself begins to feel claustrophobic. The air grows heavier with censorship and nationalism. You walk with Karl past government buildings plastered with royal decrees, and you can almost hear the paper crumpling under his glare. He doesn't say it out loud, but you know what he's thinking. This can't be it. There has to be more. Quill in hand, he begins a personal journal that includes such cheerful phrases as "the world is an illusion," and "man is the highest being for man." That second one, oddly enough, becomes a cornerstone of his later work. So if you ever feel dramatic for writing angsty diary entries, just remember Karl Marx did it too, and historians made a whole career out of reading them. By the time you drift off for a nap, maybe leaning against a pile of his discarded poetry drafts, the seeds are planted. The boy from Trier may not yet know what socialism is. He hasn't heard of dialectical materialism, but the tension between what is and what could be is already humming in the background like that soft fan you turned on earlier. You dream alongside him, in the lull between adolescence and revolution. And in that dream, even cobbled streets start to feel like runways. Asterisk. You're older now, at least Karl isn't. The setting's changed. You blink and find yourself inside a dim, smoky tavern in Bonn, where students with wild hair and wilder ideas argue over philosophy while downing their third beer before noon. Welcome to university life, 1830s edition, where the syllabus is mostly Hegel and hangovers are part of the curriculum. You sit beside Karl, who's traded in his boyhood awkwardness for the early swagger of someone who's read too many footnotes. His beard hasn't quite reached legendary proportions yet, but the attitude is forming. You watch as he launches into a debate about metaphysics with a guy who just recited the Iliad in Greek between sips of cheap wine. Charming, chaotic, and almost impossible to follow unless you're fluent in dialectics and poor decision-making. University is where Karl meets the young Hegelians, a ragtag group of freethinkers who worship the philosophy of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, but with a rebellious twist. You're not sure what's more intimidating, their vocabulary or their commitment to smoking indoors. They sit at round tables and dissect ideas like surgeons, except their tools are irony, scorn, and aggressive eyebrow movements. You try to listen in, something about the dialectical triad of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, which, if you squint, sounds like the world's worst magic trick. Hegel's idea was that history progresses by contradictions clashing until something new emerges. The young Hegelians take that concept and point it straight at religion and the state, God, a social construct, the monarchy, outdated, Christmas, probably suspicious, and Karl. He doesn't just eat it up, he wants to improve the recipe. One night, you find him scribbling furiously in his dorm room, ranting about alienation and the absurdity of divine authority. His roommate is passed out under a coat, but Karl's fully alert, eyes blazing like someone who's just realized that the universe is a hoax and he's the only one who got the memo. He starts skipping law lectures to write dense essays with titles like On the Difference Between the Democritean and Epicurean Philosophy of Nature. You can practically hear the paper groan under the weight of his arguments. It's the kind of writing that makes your eyelids heavy, not because it's boring, but because your brain simply needs a nap after passing the first sentence. Historians still argue whether Karl's time with the young Hegelians truly shaped his politics or just sharpened his edge. Some say it gave him the scaffolding for his later ideas. Dogs think he outgrew them faster than his whiskey tolerance. A quirky fact for your nightstand brain. Marx was so passionate about writing that he once forgot to eat for an entire day, only to faint during a lecture. The professor assumed he was drunk. In fairness, this was university in 1836, so that was usually a safe guess. Outside the lecture halls, the world is not exactly stable. The German Confederation is in the grips of political repression. Censorship is rampant. Secret police monitor radical student groups, and you often find yourself glancing over your shoulder while walking with Karl down the university steps. He doesn't care. In fact, the risk seems to energize him. One evening, while you both sit under the stars beside the Rhine River, Karl launches into a passionate monologue, not about girls, not about exams, but about justice. He says something about how humanity deserves more than survival, deserves to shape its own destiny. You say nothing, half because you're in awe, and half because the mosquitoes are relentless. Karl's writing begins to shift. Less abstract, more grounded. He starts to question the real-world implications of all this theory. If Hegel was right, and society changes through conflict, then what is the conflict of now? His answer will come soon, but you already see the sparked, of course. University isn't all revelations and revolutions. There's also dueling. Yes, dueling. Because what better way to settle philosophical disputes than by hitting each other with swords at dawn? Karl joins a student fencing club, partly for fun, partly for honor, and partly because 19th century German students had some truly intense ideas about masculinity. One duel leaves him with a scar above his tiny jagged badge of pride. You wince watching it happen. He shrugs it off like he just stubbed his toe, but beneath the bravado, there's something lonely in him, a kind of spiritual dislocation. You feel it when he stares out the window during parties, or when he laughs too loudly at bad jokes. He's still searching, not just for truth, but for meaning. And then comes the turning point. Back in Trier, his father dies. The letters from home grow darker. Financial worries creep in. Without his father's support, Karl becomes more restless, more committed. You can almost hear the gears clicking into place, grief morphing into ideology, uncertainty hardening into clarity. By the time he earns his doctorate, he's completely uninterested in becoming a professor. The universities are too conservative, the curriculum too stagnant. Instead, he turns to journalism. You sit with him on a wobbly chair in a smoky editorial office, watching as he types out scathing critiques of the Prussian state. He attacks censorship, monarchy, the church. His editor is half impressed, half panicking. The government is watching. Eventually, the pressure gets too high. His articles are banned. The publication is shuttered. He's blacklisted, and so, with a suitcase full of banned essays and a head full of revolutionary thunder, Karl packs his bags. You trail behind him, slightly jet-lagged, metaphorically, and step off the train into the next phase of his journey. Paris. The air smells of fresh bread and civil unrest. Asterisk. Paris, 1843. You step off the metaphorical train and instantly regret not bringing earplugs, or at least a looser scarf. The city thrums with life, clanging carts, chattering revolutionaries, and enough political gossip to fill 1,000 manifestos. Somewhere in the Marais district, Karl Marx breathes in the air like he's inhaling freedom itself, and also a touch of sewage. Welcome to pre-Haussmann Paris. Baby. You trail him through crooked alleys and wine-soaked cafes, his boots echoing on cobblestones as he searches not just for inspiration, but for something warmer, something softer. Jenny. Yes. Jenny von Westphal, Karl's childhood sweetheart and now his wife. You spot her standing by the window of their cramped apartment, elegant as ever, despite being surrounded by unpaid bills and revolutionary leaflets. Her clothes still carry a hint of aristocracy, but her hands are busy folding baby linens. It's clear she didn't marry Karl for a stable income. They're not quite newlyweds anymore, but the love between them still fizzes. In stolen moments, you catch Karl slipping notes into her apron pocket mini-essays on love and justice, sometimes on the same page. You're convinced their pet names probably sound like political slogans. My dialectical angel, maybe. Their life is romantic in the literary sense, meaning beautiful and wildly inconvenient. You sit beside them on threadbare cushions as Karl rants about Hegel's logic and France's broken class system, while Jenny stitches socks with a royal calm that could end wars. She's not just a supporter, She's his editor, confidant, and occasionally his therapist, and honestly, she deserves a full dissertation of her own. Historians still argue whether Jenny helped shape Marx's ideology or simply endured it. Some claim she was his silent co-architect. Others suggest she was more of a patient witness. Either way, it's hard to ignore how fiercely they clung to each other through the chaos. Here's a little-known tidbit for you. Jenny once pawned her family silver to buy Karl paper, not food, not medicine, paper. That's devotion, ... or maybe just enabling, depending on your sleep-deprived perspective. Paris itself becomes Karl's ideological petri dish. He spends his days in libraries, cafes, and the reading rooms of the Bibliothèque Nationale, devouring everything from Rousseau to Adam Smith. He meets radicals from all corners: German exiles, French socialists, Belgian firebrands, and debates them all with the energy of someone who thinks sleep is for the bourgeoisie. You, meanwhile, are doing your best not to nod off during a 5-hour discussion on the labor theory of value. But Paris isn't all philosophy and croissants, troubles brewing. The French government, already nervous about the surge of socialist thinking, starts to keep an eye on Karl. His articles, especially those published in Deutsch-Französische Jahrbucher, raising eyebrows, and not the good kind. One night, over a dinner of bread, olives, and what might generously be called cheese, Marx leans across the table and whispers, "We are not safe here." You gulp your wine. It tastes like regret and fermented ambition. Despite the danger, Karl keeps pushing. His writing gets sharper, angrier. He begins to criticize not just monarchs and priests, but his fellow leftists too. You learn quickly that Marx has zero chill when it comes to ideological inconsistency. If someone claims to support the working class but hedges their bets, Karl skewers them like it's open mic night at a revolutionary roast. Among these intellectual brawls, he meets one man who doesn't flinch, Friedrich Engels. You don't pay much attention to him at first. Just another well-dressed guy with impressive sideburns. But soon, it's clear Engels is more than just another radical. He's the co-conspirator Karl didn't know he needed. And yes, we'll get to that bromance soon. For now though, let's focus on Karl's pen and the manifesto that's slowly beginning to take shape. It starts small, a few essays, a scathing critique here, a provocative footnote there. But one theme begins to rise above the others. Alienation. You lie on the rickety couch while Karl scribbles feverishly at his desk, muttering about workers separated from their labor, from each other, from their very selves. He talks about how the factory system has turned people into appendages of machines, which, admittedly, sounds like something your boss might do if given the chance. The concept haunts him. You watch as he fills notebook after notebook, trying to make sense of how capitalism doesn't just exploit it as strangers. It makes people less human. And yet, as Karl sketches out his diagnosis of the system, you feel something tender in his outrage. This isn't just anger, it's empathy, it's heartbreak. You start to realize Marx doesn't just want to tear things down. He wants to make people whole again. The city presses in. Paris grows tense. Surveillance intensifies. The walls seem thinner every night. One evening, while Karl is out delivering a letter, you catch Jenny burning one of his older drafts, just in case. She doesn't flinch. Her face glows in the firelight, unshaken. You sit in silence, understanding now why Karl calls her his strength, and then boom, the authorities come knocking. The French government, under pressure from the Prussians, decides Karl is more trouble than he's worth. He's expelled, again. Another suitcase, another goodbye. This time you're off to Brussels. As the carriage rocks gently down muddy roads, Karl stares out the window, hand resting on Jenny's. He doesn't say much, but you can feel it. Something is shifting. The ideas are no longer scattered sparks. They're beginning to form a storm. He's no longer just a dreamer or a critic. He's becoming something else, a builder of systems, a forger of manifestos, a man who wants to redesign the very way humans live and labor and love. And you're there, yawning slightly, watching the transformation in real time. Brussels, 1845. You arrive to find a city that seems half asleep and half suspicious. It's quieter than Paris, less fiery. But Karl, he's more alive than ever. You've barely unpacked before he's dragging you into yet another cafe with rickety chairs and revolutionary manifestos pinned to the walls. There's a lot of talk, again, about the working class, but now the tone is sharper, clearer, as if the fog of philosophy has lifted. And right there, next to him, is Friedrich Engels. Ah, yes. Let's talk about this bromance, shall we? Engels is everything Karl isn't. Born into wealth, impeccably dressed, fluent in business speak, and suspiciously good at ordering wine. You get the feeling he'd be perfectly comfortable giving a TED talk and leading a strike in the same afternoon. The chemistry between them is instant. It's not just friendship, it's ideological fireworks. You, meanwhile, sip your lukewarm coffee and try not to feel like a third wheel in the revolution. They start spending nearly every waking moment together, writing, arguing, pacing, occasionally laughing at inside jokes about Feuerbach. You don't get most of them, but that's okay. Their collaboration is like watching a duet between a thunderstorm and a violin. Marx brings the fire, Engels brings the structure. Together, they begin laying down what will soon become the skeleton of modern socialism. Historians still argue whether Engels was the co-author of Marxism or simply its midwife. Some say Marx couldn't have built the system without him. Others insist Engels' role was overblown. But as you sit through yet another late-night session in their shared study, watching Engels gently nudge Karl's wild prose into something legible, it's hard to deny this is a two-man act. Meanwhile, Brussels provides the peace Karl needs. It's here that he begins to refine the concept of historical materialism. You catch fragments of his reasoning as he paces the floorboards. Barefoot, history doesn't unfold because of ideas, unfolds because of material conditions. The economy isn't just part of society it structures, it's culture, politics, even religion. They're all shaped by who controls the means of production. You blink slowly, trying to follow. It's a lot, and yet the idea sticks. It burrows into your sleepy mind like a gentle whisper. What if the world is the way it is because of who owns the factories? Quirky sidebar. One afternoon, Karl tries to diagram his theory on a window pane using Jenny's eyeliner. She is not impressed. The stain never fully comes off, and for weeks, it looks like their flat is haunted by abstract geometry. But it's not just theory in Brussels, it's practice. Karl and Engels dive headfirst into organizing. They help form the Communist Correspondence Committee, a network of radicals across Europe meant to coordinate ideas and action. Letters fly in and out like pigeons with revolutionary passports. You help seal some of them with wax, feeling oddly like a sleepy intern in the world's edgiest startup. One night, in the middle of editing yet another draft, Karl stands up and declares, "We must write something the workers can carry in their pocket." You stare at him, dazed, and ask, like a pamphlet. He nods. Something portable, punchy, practical. The idea begins to take shape. A manifesto, a blueprint. Not a vague dream, but a focused call to arms. And so begins the birth of the communist. Manifesto. You're there in the cramped attic apartment as Karl and Engels argue over the opening line. Karl wants something bold, memorable, and after hours of pacing and muttering and one very aggressive sneeze, he blurts it out. A spectre is haunting Europe. You pause. That's actually kind of spooky and perfect. The writing comes quickly now. You can almost see the steam rising from the ink as Karl scribbles down each line. The manifesto is more than a document. It's a map of the world's fault lines. It talks about class struggle, the rise of the bourgeoisie, and the inevitable revolt of the proletariat. You hear echoes of his childhood pain, his university defiance, his Parisian clarity. Every sentence pulses with urgency, like it knows time is running out. Historians still argue whether the Communist Manifesto was intended as a global prophecy, or just a rallying cry for a moment in time. Some see it as a sacred text, others, a political pamphlet that got lucky. But in that room, on that snowy evening in 1847, it feels like thunder bottled in paper. It's worth noting that while Marx wrote the majority of the text, Engels brought the organization and polish. He knew how to distill chaos into clarity. You get the feeling he was the guy who double-checked spelling while also sharpening the pitchfork. The manifesto ends with a line that sends a chill down your spine. Even now, workers of the world, unite. It doesn't just demand dares the world to imagine something else, something bigger. With the manuscript complete, they send it off to be printed by the Communist League, a newly formed political group that they're actively influencing, if not outright controlling. You help pack up the pages, watching as Karl kisses Jenny's forehead with ink-stained fingers. She smiles, even though she knows the storm it will bring. And oh, does the storm arrive. Within weeks, revolutions start breaking out across Europe. The revolutions of 1848, from France to Italy, from Austria to Germany. People are rising, demanding rights, toppling regimes. You sit glued to every whisper in the cafes, watching as Karl's words ripple through the continent like fire through dry grass. But Karl isn't celebrating. Not really. He knows better than anyone that writing a manifesto is one thing. Building a movement, that's the real struggle. And soon, the backlash begins. Governments crack down, radical presses are raided, protesters are arrested. The revolution, it turns out, is not welcome everywhere. The Belgian authorities, always a little twitchy about foreign agitators, expel Karl. Again, another exile, another goodbye. Jenny sighs as she folds their clothes. The baby coughs. You rub your temples and wonder how many suitcases a revolution really needs. Next stop, Cologne. The revolution is far from over. Cologne, 1848. You arrive during the revolutionary heat wave, metaphorical and literal. The air feels electric, like someone's about to flip a historical switch. Smoke curls from chimneys and from the edge of every conversation. People aren't just murmuring about change anymore. They're yelling it in the streets. And here comes Karl, dragging you along again, sleeves rolled up, hair wilder than usual, eyes glowing with purpose. Cologne isn't exactly waiting with open arms, but it does offer something Karl hasn't had in a while, a printing press. You duck into a dusty little building on a cobbled street, where Karl's latest venture has just taken form. The Neue Rheinische Zeitung. It's not just a newspaper, it's a weapon, a megaphone, a very sharp stick aimed at the ribs of monarchy, privilege, and capitalist comfort zones. The first edition hits the streets with a thud. Literally, you hear someone drop it, startled by how bold it is. There's Karl on the front page, not with a portrait, but with words that crackle, calling out the Prussian government, the bankers, the landlords, even some so-called allies of the revolution. The guy does not play favorites. You try proofreading for him one night and fall asleep halfway through the second paragraph. The man writes like he's on trial for thinking too small. Still, Cologne becomes a real testing ground. The revolutions of 1848 are in full swing across Europe. Uprisings, barricades, crumbling empires. You duck behind doorways as troops march by, wondering if any of this will lead to what Karl calls the dictatorship of the proletariat, which, let's be honest, sounds like a phrase guaranteed to upset someone's dinner party. Historians still argue whether the 1848 revolutions were the last gasp of feudalism or the first breath of modern democracy. For Karl, they're a tragic rehearsally glimpse of what could be. If only people weren't so easily pacified by crumbs, the paper, publishers daily. Marx writes with the urgency of a man who knows he could be arrested at any moment because, well, he could. And eventually, he is. In a moment that's both dramatic and deeply on brand, Karl is charged with inciting rebellion. You attend the trial, half awake, tucked in the back row. The courtroom smells of old ink and stale politics. Karl stands, unshaken, and defends not just his paper, but the entire concept of free speech, class struggle, and the right to dream out loud. The jury acquits him, standing ovation from the back row. You almost spill your tea, but the victory is short-lived. The Prussian state isn't thrilled about being publicly roasted. One by one, the revolutionaries are silenced. The printing press is seized. The paper shut down. And Karl, guess what? Expelled. Again. It's becoming a trend. This time, there's no romantic send-off. No brave glances over shoulders. Just a quiet packing of bags and a long sigh from Jenny. You sit by the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass, and wonder if there's anywhere left for them to go, and then a letter arrives. From London. Engels is already there, of course, and he's arranged everything. A modest place to live, a bit of financial support, a plan. You feel something in Karl's posture shift. Not defeat, not hope, exactly, but resolve. Like he's digging in, ready to wait out the storm. Cologne fades behind you as the train hisses into motion. Another exile, another country, another chapter. But now Karl knows better than to chase revolution with just a pen. The next move will be slower, more patient, a deeper excavation into the roots of the system itself. And you, barely staying awake, rest your head on your rolled-up coat as the countryside blurs past. Somewhere out there is a city of fog and fire, coal and contradiction. London is waiting, but let's take a beat before we get there, because Cologne, short as the stay was, taught Karl something essential, that revolutions don't fail because people don't try. They fail because people don't understand the forces behind the curtain, those vast, grinding economic gears that shape everything. It's a brutal insight, and it becomes the seed of a much larger work, something darker, denser, and far more ambitious than anything he's written so far. But we'll get to that mountain of ink later. For now, you watch the smoke rise from Cologne one last time, floating into the night like a ghost of what almost was. London, 1849. You step off the train and are immediately swallowed by the grey. It's a different kind of city, heavier, industrial, indifferent. The buildings seem to press down rather than rise up, and the sky is the colour of tepid tea. Welcome to the heart of the British Empire, where soot and ambition mix in equal measure. Karl looks older already. The years of exile, the endless flights from country to country, the failures of 1848, they've worn him thin, but London doesn't care who he is. Here, he's just another immigrant, broke and dragging his weary family into a tiny flat in Soho that smells vaguely of mildew and philosophical despair. You've seen some cramped quarters, but this is next level. The rooms are barely large enough to pace in. Furniture is mismatched and borrowed, and the fireplace sulks more than it burns. The baby's cough hasn't stopped since Cologne. Jenny does her best, sewing torn clothes by candlelight and occasionally muttering things in German that you suspect are not flattering to fate. And yet, Karl is more focused than ever. The newspapers may be gone, but now he has a bigger mission, dissecting capitalism itself. This is where the real grind begins. Each morning, you accompany him to the British Museum reading room, his cathedral, his laboratory, his padded cell. The place smells like ink and empire. Karl takes notes obsessively, surrounded by ledgers, factory reports, economic theory. He's not browsing, he's performing an autopsy. Historians still argue whether Karl's London years were his most productive or his most desperate. There's a fine line between genius and collapse, and Karl walks it in worn-out boots. The project that begins to grow in his notebooks is Capital, or, as it'll eventually be known, Das Kapital. It isn't just a book, it's a beast, a monster, of economic theory that tries to explain how capitalism works, not just in slogans, but in cold, calculated mechanics. And oh, does he go deep. You sit beside him some afternoons as he mutters about surplus value, commodity fetishism, and the contradictions of capital. You're halfway through a crust of bread and already dozing off when he slams the table and announces, exploitation is baked into the system. You nod, chewing slowly, pretending you totally followed that. But Karl isn't entirely alone. Engels, bless him, steps in like the rich best friend in a Dickens novel. He sends money, encouragement, and corrections. If Karl is the haunted theorist, Engels is the practical enabler. Without him, Jenny and the children might have ended up on the streets. Quirky sidebar. Karl, in a moment of poor judgment, once tried to write by candlelight while balancing a cup of tea on his knee. The result? A scalded thigh and a rant about bourgeois ceramics. Meanwhile, London hums on, unaware of the revolution brewing in a back room. The city is a paradox, home to the most advanced capitalist economy in the world, and simultaneously the perfect stage for Karl's critique. He walks the streets and sees poverty beneath palace balconies, child labor outside textile shops, and bank towers rising like temples to Mammon. He's not just writing from theory now, he's writing from lived contradiction. But it's not all. Progress. The manuscript grows slower than expected. Revisions pile up. Some days, he stares at a single paragraph for hours. You try to help by organizing his notes. Once, he nearly faints at the sight of your filing system, which mostly consists of stuffing things into labeled socks. Jenny, saint that she is, holds the family together with fraying threads. Her letters to friends talk of pawning the silverware, the heartbreak of losing more children to illness, and the constant shadow of hunger. Yet, she believes in Karl's work, believes in him perhaps more than he does. One night, during a particularly miserable winter, you all huddle around the fireplace, nursing watery soup and low spirits. Karl, ever the poet of grim truths, murmurs, "Philosophers have only interpreted the world ... The point is to change it." You smile. That one, at least, makes sense on the first try. Still, life doesn't pause for genius. Karl's health deteriorates. Liver problems, boils, migraines. His body rebels against the very ideas. His brain refuses to rest from. He looks like a prophet cursed to understand too much. Yet the manuscript inches forward. Engels begs him to publish something, anything, to keep the momentum. Finally, in 1867, after 2 decades of mental trench warfare, Volume 1 of Capital is printed. The cover is unimpressive, but the content, explosive. Well, eventually. See, the book is dense, like you'll fall asleep halfway through the table of contents. Dense. You try reading it one night and wake up hours later with your face in a chapter titled The Working Day. But for those who can push through, the rewards are rich. Marx lays out how value is created through labor, how profit depends on exploitation, how capitalism contains the seeds of its own undoing. It's not just a critique, it's a diagnosis. Historians still debate whether capital is a timeless analysis or a deeply flawed system with poetic moments. Either way, its shadow looms large. Even today, its language commodity, exploitation, alienation echoes in protests, essays, and late-night pub debates. But success doesn't come overnight. The first print run barely sells. Critics are either baffled or hostile, and Karl, he shrugs. The revolution he's writing for hasn't arrived yet, but he's laying the groundwork for when it does, by now. The flat is filled with books, and children's shoes, and drafts upon drafts. You feel like a character in a Victorian ghost story, surrounded by intellectual poltergeists. But there's also love here. Laughter, sometimes. Jenny teasing Karl when he forgets to eat. Marx playing chess with the girls. Little pockets of warmth in the fog. London becomes home in its own way, and as you fall asleep beside a pile of factory census data, you wonder, will the world ever be ready for what Karl's trying to say? You wake to the sound of coughing. Not yours. It's Karl Agin, wrapping his worn coat tighter, hunched over his desk, pen scratching as if the words might catch fire. The morning light seeps through the soot-smudged window, weak and apologetic. London never promises warmth, and it never apologizes for the cold. By now, the Marx household is in a strange rhythm. Poverty is a roommate. Illness is a recurring guest. And yet, Karl carries on obsessed not just with finishing Capital, but with the real world it's meant to change. You begin to realize he's not just writing theory anymore. He's watching for signs of the storm. The year is 1871, and Paris is on fire. The Franco-Prussian War has just ended in disaster for France. The people, sick of defeat and corruption, rise up and form the Paris Communal Workers' Government, run by ordinary citizens, rejecting the old state and its polished boots. Karl's eyes gleam when he hears the news. They've done it, he whispers, barely breathing. The workers have seized history. You sit beside him in the same dusty flat as he writes one of his most urgent works, The Civil War in France. It's not a dry dissection, it's a love letter. A eulogy, a rallying cry for the future. He praises the Commune's courage. There, abolition of standing armies, their push for equality. But, of course, it doesn't last. In May, government forces storm Paris. The repression is swift and brutal. Thousands are executed. Blood pools in the streets. Dreams are buried in mass graves. You read the reports together. Karl doesn't weep, he fumes, and something inside him solidifies. He no longer believes that revolution will come politely, dressed in suits and pamphlets. The future will be torn from the jaws of power, or not at all. Historians still argue whether the Paris Commune was a foolish blip, or the first real taste of workers' rule. Marx, he sees it as proof of concept, an imperfect, bloody, glorious attempt. From that point on, the tone of his work shifts, less pleading, more hammering. The world has shown its hand, now it's Karl's turn. And there's another layer to all this. The International, or, more formally, the International Workingmen's Association. Formed in 1864, it's supposed to be a global coalition of worker movements, trade unions, anarchists, and socialists, all trying to not talk over each other at every meeting. Spoiler: they do talk over each other. Karl becomes one of its most important figures, writing resolutions, fighting ideological battles, and trying to prevent the whole thing from imploding over whether to use comrade or citizen. He's especially irked by one man, Mikkel, Bakunin, the anarchist firebrand. If Marx is the stern professor, Bakunin is the punk rocker smashing windows during finals. They agree on almost nothing except that capitalism is bad, and oppression worse. Their rivalry becomes legendary. Marx believes in the necessity of a structured workers' state, at least temporarily. Bakunin believes all states are evil and should be torn down like crumbling wallpaper. The debates are passionate, often petty, and wildly entertaining. At one particularly dramatic moment, Bakunin accuses Marx of trying to dictate socialism from the comfort of a London sofa. Karl responds by basically calling Bakunin a chaotic influencer who doesn't read footnotes. Quirky detail: the minutes of some meetings include complaints about the coffee. Turns out even revolutionaries need caffeine. Eventually, the tensions boil over. The International splits. The anarchists go one way, the Marxists another. It's like watching a rock band break up over creative differences, except these guys are arguing about the future of civilization. Karl, predictably, wins the bureaucratic battle, but the split hurts. The dream of a united global workers' front feels more distant than ever. Still, he doesn't stop. He can't. Back at the flat, things are quieter. The children grow up. Some don't survive. The losses never leave Jenny's eyes. Yet the house remains full of arguments, laughter, ink, and books stacked so precariously they might qualify as architectural hazards. One evening, over weak tea and a borrowed candle, Karl mutters about dialectics again. You nod sleepily, wondering if dialectics is just a fancy way to say never straightforward. And he smiles. Everything contains its opposite, he says. Every triumph, a flaw. Every flaw, a potential. You try to scribble that down and end up writing everything is a sandwich. It's late. Forgive yourself. The strange thing is Karl is becoming famous. Quietly, in circles of radicals, in university debates, in strike meetings across Europe, people whisper his name. Das Kapital might be dense, but its ideas are spreading, taking root. Marx becomes both a person and a symbol. You see pamphlets quoting him in German, French, Russian. A group of factory workers in Manchester sends a letter thanking him for explaining why they feel like ghosts. A group of students in Italy reads his work by moonlight, daring each other to imagine a world without bosses. He receives mail now. Adoring, critical, confused. He answers some, ignores many, and grumbles about others. But you can see it, a quiet flame of satisfaction. The work is moving beyond him. Still, he doesn't rest. He starts drafting volumes 2 and 3 of Capital. They'll never be fully finished. But that's not the point. The point is that he tried. Historians still argue whether Marx should have focused more on activism than theory, more on uniting movements than writing tomes. But Karl believed the greatest action was understanding. You cannot change what you cannot name, and so, in this small, smoky flat, surrounded by books and ghosts, Karl continues naming the system piece by piece. As you drift off to sleep, you hear him coughing again, but between the coughs, a line forms on the page, and the revolution moves a single word closer, asterisk. The fog rolls in thicker now, both outside and within. Karl is aging, visibly, like a candle burning at both ends, but still somehow refusing to go out. You sit in the corner of the flat, bundled under a moth-eaten blanket, as the familiar chorus of coughing, scribbling, and muttered German continues like an old vinyl looped too many times. You're in the twilight of his life, but no one dares admit it, yet not even him. London doesn't help. The winters grow colder, the sunlight more elusive, and the illnesses harder to shake. Karl's once sturdy frame stoops more each year. His beard is mostly grey now, streaked with white like frost on coal. Still, his mind refuses to surrender. If anything, his thinking grows sharper, more urgent. He's knee-deep in the unfinished volumes of Capital 2 and 3 on. They're a mess. Stacks of notes, diagrams, tangents that loop back on themselves like philosophical spaghetti. You offer to help organize them again, and this time he doesn't threaten to exile you to Buchanan's couch. Progress Butty keeps betraying him. He suffers from carbuncles, a grotesque-sounding condition that's as painful as it sounds, and lung infections that keep coming back like they have a vendetta. Sometimes he has to lie down between sentences, but still he writes, because he knows time is now the rarest commodity. One afternoon, he's reclining in his chair, wheezing slightly, when he suddenly asks, "Do you think the workers will read any of this?" You're not sure how to answer. He chuckles dryly. Doesn't matter. Someone will, someday. You want to believe him. Jenny is still the sun that warms this cold little galaxy. But even suns burn out. In 1881, she passes away after a long illness. The house goes quiet in a way that's not just about sound. It's the kind of silence that coats everything: his coat, your socks, the walls. He doesn't eat properly. He forgets to sleep. You try to keep him tethered, but the loss has drained the fire from his bones. The letters he writes after Jenny's death are heavier, not sadder, just dimmer. Like the world has gone out of focus. Historians still argue whether Karl would have finished his work if Jenny had lived longer. She was his editor, his partner, his first line of defense against the storm. Without her, the wind gets in more easily, and then the second blow. His eldest daughter, Jenniken, dies a year later. It's almost cruel how quickly the universe dismantles what remains of him. He starts refusing visitors, ignoring most correspondence. Even Engels grows worried. The notes for Capital sit unfinished. You pick through them some nights, trying to decipher his handwriting. It's like decoding encrypted rage. There are flashes of brilliance, yes, but also scribbles, contradictions, ideas too large for the margins they're trapped in. And yet, even now, Karl doesn't let go entirely. He still finds moments of clarity, strange little windows when the fog lifts. One night, during a rare bout of strength, he looks up from his notes and says, "You know what the most dangerous thing is? You." Expect him to say, capitalism, or maybe nationalism, or landlords. Hope, he says, because it keeps us trying, even when we know better. You smile. Sounds like you. He smirks, then coughs violently for a minute straight. By the end of 1882, it's clear he's nearing the finish line. His health is deteriorating rapidly, and yet he refuses to die at his desk, like a cliché. Instead, he tries warmer climates, spends time in Algiers for a short while. But even North Africa can't undo the years of damp London air and ideological exhaustion. There's a quirky footnote here. By the way, Karl, while in Algiers, reportedly had a brief fascination with desert lizards. He would sit and watch them sun themselves for hours, occasionally muttering that they probably had better living conditions than most English workers. You don't even question it anymore. By March of 1883, he's back in London, back in his chair, back to the only place he ever truly belonged, between an idea and a page. And then, one quiet afternoon, without drama, he slips away. You're the one who finds him, head resting gently, not on his notes, but beside them as, if even in death he needed a little distance from all the thoughts that never quite stopped chasing him. He was 64. Engels, ever the loyal lieutenant, delivers the eulogy at his funeral. Fewer than 15 people attend. There are no fanfares, no red banners, no roaring crowds, just cold wind and a grave in Highgate Cemetery. But Engels speaks truth that day. Marx was the best hated and most calumniated man of his time, he says. And yet, he died beloved, mourned, and admired by millions of workers to whom he had opened a new world. Historians still debate whether Karl Marx died a failure or a visionary. In his lifetime, he saw few victories. But history is not about speed, it's about echoes, and his. They're just starting. You leave the graveside slowly. There's a strange stillness in your chest. Like maybe, just maybe, the work really isn't over, because ideas, once seeded, do not die. They grow in silence, they sharpen in darkness, they wait, and as you drift toward sleep once more, you hear at the rustle of pages in some distant library, the muttered debates in backroom cafes, the slow, thunderous breath of history remembering its old ghosts. You wake again not in Karl's flat, not this time, but in a different kind of room, wood-panelled, echoing with strange accents, thick with the scent of tobacco, revolution, and sweaty overcoats. It's 1883, just months after Marx's death, and the world hasn't even begun to grasp what he's left behind. But someone has. Engels, yes. Friedrich Engels, the man who always played second fiddle, but never dropped the melody. He's mourning, sure, but there's no time to wallow. Because Karl didn't just leave behind a legacy, he left behind a literary bomb diffused by coffee stains, unfinished drafts, and cryptic margin notes, and Engels. He's the one holding the wire cutters. You sit beside him as he spreads out Karl's manuscripts, stack after stack of drafts, outlines, illegible side comments, and entire chapters that just stop mid-sentence. It's like trying to build a cathedral with a box of puzzle pieces and no lid image. And yet Engels doesn't flinch, because he knows this isn't just about Karl anymore, it's about the world understanding the system he tried to expose. He rolls up his sleeves, lights a pipe, and dives in. It'll take him over a decade. Volume 2 of Das Kapital comes out in 1885. Volume 3 follows in 1894, after Engels has spent countless nights editing, interpreting, and sometimes just flat-out guessing what Karl would have meant. By organic composition of capital C appendix. No appendix attached. The books are dense, dry in places, explosive in others. Not bedtime reading unless you're trying to knock out a rhinoceros. But they matter, because now, for the first time, the full picture of Marx's theory starts to take shape. The cycles of capitalism, the way profit comes from surplus value, the constant pressure to cut labor costs. Marx doesn't just say capitalism is bad. He diagrams its bloodstream. Historians still argue whether Engels shaped too much of the final product. Some even whisper that he polished away the sharper, messier corners of Karl's mind. But without him, those drafts would have stayed buried in a London drawer, read only by moths and aspiring economists with a death wish. And here's the fun twist. Marx is becoming more famous now that he's dead than he ever was alive. You hear his name on workers' tongues in Germany, whispered in factory meetings in Belgium, scribbled in the notebooks of young revolutionaries in Russia. His ideas travel faster than his body ever could. And sometimes they mutate. By the 1890s, Marxism becomes a thing. Not just a philosophy, but a movement. One that even Karl might not recognize entirely. If he popped back in for a ghostly look, different thinkers interpret him differently. Some, like Edward Bernstein, argue for revisionism, the idea that maybe capitalism can evolve into socialism through gradual reforms instead of revolution. Others, like Rosa Luxemburg, think that's nonsense and want to grab the system by the throat. Then comes a new name, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, or, as history will know him, Lenin. You watch him closely. Young, razor-sharp, angry. He devours Marx's works like their prophecy, but he also twists them, adapts them, for Lenin. Revolution isn't just inevitable, it must be engineered through a party, through discipline, through force. In 1917, the Bolsheviks overthrow the Russian provisional government, the first successful Marxist-inspired revolution in history. Or at least, that's what they say. You're standing now in the snow of Petrograd, watching red flags rise above palaces once guarded by emperors. It's thrilling, it's terrifying, and it's messy. So much blood for something Marx once dreamed would be peaceful eventual. Even historians still debate whether Lenin's Russia was the fulfillment or betrayal of Marx's vision. After all, Karl had little to say about the day after the revolution. He was more focused on the conditions that would make one inevitable. And here's your fringe tidbit. Lenin kept a bust of Marx on his desk, right next to a clock that never worked. Time and theory locked in silent disagreement. Back in Western Europe, socialist parties grow. Some follow Marx's playbook. Others tear it up and rewrite the lines. The German SPD becomes a major political force. The Labour Party rises in Britain. Meanwhile, anarchists roll their eyes and mutter, "We told you so." Marx's name starts appearing on banners, pamphlets, graffiti. You see it scrawled on jail walls, quoted in parliamentary debates, used in protests, manifestos, and awkwardly by people who've never read more than 3 lines of the Communist Manifesto but still really love quoting it on Twitter. You laugh, quietly. He would have hated that, or maybe loved it. Probably both. One of the quirkiest moments comes in 1902, when a group of American socialists commissions a massive banner for a Labor Day parade. The slogan, "Labor is the source of all wealth." They attribute it to Benjamin Franklin. It was actually Marx. Go figure. You travel now, invisibly, like Marx's ghost ideas, to Italy, where Antonio Gramsci writes from prison about cultural hegemony, to China, where young radicals are translating Marx by candlelight, preparing for storms to come, to Cuba, Vietnam, Angola, everywhere the ground shakes under colonial boots. Each time, Marx is adapted, reassembled like revolutionary Lego. Sometimes they get him wrong. Sometimes they get him to right. Sometimes they use his name to justify things so brutal you wonder if Karl wouldn't rise from the grave just to slap them with Capital, Volume 3. And yet, you feel it. He's in all of it. Not the man, the spark. He didn't hand out blueprints, he handed out flint and steel, and people desperate, dreaming, furious people have been striking sparks ever since. The century turns like a grinding wheel, sparks flying, and the world reshapes itself in ways Karl never foresaw. You stand in the thick of it, now the 20th century, and Marx, oh, he's suddenly the most famous philosopher nobody actually reads. You drift through the smoky backrooms of Berlin cafes, the candlelit corners of Shanghai dormitories, and the whispered student meetings in Paris basements. It's not just theory, any Moritz movement. Messy, electrified, and riddled with contradictions by the 1920s and 30s. Marx's face appears on more posters than most living politicians. His beard alone becomes a kind of sacred icon, staring out across waves of human upheaval. Workers chant his name, university students debate his diagrams, and secret police start putting people on lists just for owning his books. And yes, nowhere does this reach such thunderous, terrifying crescendo as in the Soviet Union. Lenin is gone, and in his place rises Joseph Stalin, man with a mustache so sharp it looks like it could cut through collective dissent. He claims to be the torchbearer of Marxism, but as you pace the echoing halls of the Kremlin, you know this isn't what Karl dreamed. Not remotely. Factories sprout like weeds across the Russian tundra. 5-year plans crank out steel, tractors, and concrete at speeds Marx would have admired if he hadn't noticed the pile of bodies beside them. The gulags hum with misery. Thought becomes crime. History becomes a tool. Stalin rewrites Marx like a bad fan fiction, or ideology until it fits the machinery of the state. He quotes Das Kapital between purges, claims dialectics as justification for disappearances. Historians still argue whether Stalin's regime was the logical extreme of Marxism or its deepest betrayal. And somewhere in all of this, you imagine Karl turning in his grave not out of guilt, but out of confusion. This was never the point. Not a dictatorship of the bureaucrats. Not purges in the name of the proletariat. Meanwhile, in Western Europe, Marxism takes on a more subtle form. Intellectuals gather in drawing rooms and cafes, debating theories of alienation, commodity fetishism, and base superstructure dynamics over wine and cigarettes. Here comes the Frankfurt Schooler, brainy crew with names like Adorno, Horkheimer, and Marcuse. These thinkers don't scream slogans. They whisper analysis. They're obsessed with mass culture, with how capitalism cops everything, even your favorite love songs. They point out that under capitalism, even rebellion becomes merchandise. Quirky tidbit, one of Adorno's biggest rants was against jazz. Yes, jazz. He thought it was commodified noise that tricked people into thinking they were free. Bet you Didn't see that one coming, did you? At the same time, across the Atlantic, America is having its own complicated flirtation with Marx. During the Great Depression, when breadlines stretch longer than hope itself, Marx's books become bestsellers. Again, imagine that Wall Street brokers quoting the Communist Manifesto between sips of terrible coffee. But America doesn't stay curious for long. Enter the Red Scare, McCarthyism, and the blacklisting of anyone who so much as sneezes in German. Suddenly, Marx's name is a passport to ruin. Even Hollywood writers get interrogated for Marxist undertones. Apparently, It's a Wonderful Life was dangerously socialist. Who knew? You watch all of this unfold from a quiet corner, like a ghost at a masquerade. So many faces, so many masks. But underneath, always the same question. What did Marx really mean? Historians still debate it. Was he a humanist or a determinist? Did he believe in freedom or inevitability? Did he want a stateless utopia or a well-managed council of bearded intellectuals arguing about grain quotas? The truth, perhaps, is all of it tanned, none of it, because Karl's genius wasn't that he built a flawless system. It's that he cracked open a conversation too big to finish. And now you drift into the 1960s, and things really start to glow. You're in Paris, May 1968. Barricades rise. Tear gas rolls through the streets. Students chant, "Be real." The impossible, graffiti reads, "Marx is dead, and so are you." The revolution feels like it might actually happen until it doesn't. But the energy, the ideological fire, oh, it burns beautifully. Halfway across the globe, Marx is showing up in anti-colonial struggles. Frantz Fanon uses his frameworks to describe psychological oppression in colonized minds. Che Guevara scrawls Marxist notes in jungle camps. In Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh adapts Marxism into a nationalist survival strategy. It's everywhere, on flags, in chants, in prison letters, in neon protest signs and whispered lectures from guerrilla leaders to teenage recruits. And always, always, you can feel the tension between theory and practice, the purity of Marx's original thought versus the tangled compromises of reality, between utopia and human nature, between freedom and control. Sometimes Marx is a symbol of liberation, sometimes a mask for control, and yet people keep returning to him, like a compass that doesn't point north but somewhere else entirely. You start to understand something. Here in this historical swirl, Marx never really belonged to himself. Not after 1848, not after Capital, not after he died. He belongs to history now, to anyone bold or desperate enough to think the world could be better than it is. He is dust. And yet everywhere, and as the Cold War simmers, as walls rise and fall, as new movements sprout from old soil, you drift on, the ideas crackling like embers behind you. Somewhere in the haze, you think you hear his voice again, still coughing, still writing, still believing. You step forward now into the second half of the 20th century, and Marx, well, he's no longer just a philosopher. He's a battleground. An entire Cold War is being fought over whose version of him gets to shape the future. On one side, the Western capitalist bloc paints him as the root of all totalitarianism, bearded boogeyman whose ghost allegedly haunts every breadline and military parade east of Berlin. On the other, the Soviet Union insists that Marxism-Leninism is the only scientific path to equality, despite the looming shadow of authoritarianism and, let's be honest, a distinct lack of working-class joy. And you float between the worlds, watching the ideological tug-of-war play out like a surreal global chess match where nobody really remembers the rules. It's the 1970s, and Marx is being read in a new light. Post-colonial theorists are picking apart the Eurocentric assumptions in his work. Feminists are asking, wait, where are the women in this so-called universal struggle? Turns out, not very present. Marx wrote a lot about labor, but domestic. Labor, emotional labor, crickets. Historians still debate whether this was a blind spot or a reflection of the era he lived in. Either way, thinkers like Sylvia Federici and Angela Davis are not waiting around for a posthumous apology. They extend Marxist analysis into kitchens, classrooms, and prisons. They argue that capitalism didn't just exploit workers in factories, exploited care, emotion, and the unpaid labor of women holding families together. You find yourself standing in a 1970s university seminar, surrounded by chalk dust and radical haircuts. Students are furiously annotating capital, high on espresso and revolutionary zeal. But they're not just reading, they're remixing. Cultural Marxism, structural Marxism, humanist Marxism. You get the sense that if Karl came back, he might blink in disbelief and mutter, wait, I wrote all that. And in France, of course, it's France Marxist theory takes on a surreal elegance. Louis Althusser insists that ideology isn't just beliefs, but the very air you breathe, the structure of reality itself. Sounds poetic, until you realize he literally wrote about how schools and churches trained people to accept their place in the capitalist order, before they even know they're being trained. Fringe tidbit. Althusser, in a deeply tragic episode, later killed his wife and was deemed mentally unfit for trial. Just one of the more unsettling footnotes in the intellectual family tree of Marxism. But you don't stay there, because history is always shifting, and now it's the 1980s. The stage is set for a dramatic reversal. You stand in front of the Berlin Wall. It's enormous, ugly, absurd concrete slicing through the heart of a divided city. One side boasts bright lights and Levi's jeans, the other, queues, grey uniforms, and speeches about proletarian virtue. The West tells its citizens, look, this is what happens when you follow Marx. And to be fair, it's hard to counter that with a pamphlet. But then 1989, cracked off the wall, shudders. Graffiti artists sprint forward. Chunks fall away like old scabs. You feel the dust in your nose. The Cold War is imploding, and with it, the ideological fortress that had claimed Marx as its patriarch. You watch as Eastern Europe shakes off the Hammer-Ansical dreams. Communist parties lose elections or dissolve. Statues of Marx are pulled down, tucked into warehouses, or, in a few cases, whimsically repainted with clown makeup by teenage rebels. And in the West, a wave of triumphalism. History is over. They declare, capitalism has won. Liberal democracy reigns. Marx is finally, definitively, utterly irrelevant. But of course, you know better, because here's the thing. As markets boom and globalization spreads like a caffeinated wildfire, so to do inequality, exploitation, and alienation, the very conditions Marx wrote about in the first place. Factory jobs don't vanish, they move. Wages stagnate. Housing prices explode. Billionaires become demidos. And in the background, Karl's voice starts to whisper again. Not loud, not from a pulpit, but through cracks in the concrete. You pass through the 1990s, now an age of glitzy consumerism and dial-up internet. Nobody wants to talk about Marx. yet his fingerprints are still smudged on every conversation about corporate power, labor rights, and systemic inequality. Hip-hop artists drop his name. Economists deny him with suspicious frequency. He becomes the Voldemort of late-stage capitalism, unmentionable, yet somehow everywhere, and then something odd happens. The 2008 financial crisis hits. Banks collapse. People lose homes, savings, futures. Governments bail out billionaires while workers eat ramen and reread job listings. Suddenly, capital is a bestseller again. No joke. In the wake of Wall Street's implosion, Marx becomes cool. Not in a beret-wearing, revolution-plotting way, but as a voice that predicted all of this. Crisis is baked into capitalism, he said. And now everyone's listening. Even hedge fund managers are quoted saying they like Marx because he understood the system better than anyone. You chuckle. That's rich. From your vantage point, it's clear. Marx isn't a fossil, he's a mirror. Every time the system fails, Zor threatens two people, dig him back up, dust him off, and go, wait, didn't someone warn us about this? You think of the haunting image that became popular in this era. A graffiti mural of Marx's face on a cracked wall with the words, "I told you so," scrawled beneath in dripping red dot. No. Karl's not gone, he's just patient. The 21st century opens like a cracked phone, screen familiar but distorted. And there you are, still trailing Karl Marx, like a ghost tethered to an idea. Only now, you're walking through an algorithmically curated world, where clicks replace votes and attention is the new currency. Marx didn't predict this exactly. There are no chapters in Das Kapital on TikTok, capitalism, or targeted ads. But you get the feeling he'd be furiously scribbling notes about it all. Because here, in the glow of your smartphone, alienation isn't just about factories anymore, it's about the scrolling. You're alienated from your labor, sure, but also from your body, your time, even your rest. You're sold a lifestyle you can't afford, and made to feel like it's your fault. Productivity apps beep at you. Mindfulness is monetized. Billionaires cosplay as philosophers on podcasts. And somewhere in this mess, Marx's ideas creep back into mainstream discourse, not with revolution in the streets, but with memes, documentaries, and painfully honest Reddit threads about rent and burnout. Remember, Karl never wanted a crystal palace of perfect answers. He wanted people to look around and ask, wait, who benefits from this? That question never really went out of style. You scroll through online forums where workers compare wages, share horror stories from the service industry, and explain surplus value with surprising fluency. Marxism today is less about dogma and more about vibes. It's a mood, a diagnosis, a raised eyebrow at late-stage capitalism. Quirky fact: the term late-stage capitalism was originally academic, coined decades ago. Now it's a meme, usually attached to an image of a robotic dog being used to deliver Uber Eats, or someone selling tap water as artisanal hydration. You chuckle softly. Even the absurdity was anticipated. In Capital, Marx noted how commodifies everything, yes, even the surreal, even the unthinkable. Historians still debate whether he envisioned it going this far, but few doubt he'd feel vindicated. And yet, this isn't a story of simple resurgence. Marxism in the 21st century is fractured, debated, constantly evolving. There are new voices, new contexts. Climate change, for instance, reframes everything. The old industrial struggles now live under a green sky. Enter eco-socialism. You find yourself listening to activists who draw direct lines from deforestation and fossil capitalism to Marx's theories of metabolic rift, the idea that capitalism ruptures the natural processes between humans and the earth. Suddenly, Das Kapital reads like an ecological horror story. Marx, in one of his lesser-known passages, warned that soil exhaustion would be a consequence of capitalist agriculture. And now, entire ecosystems collapse under profit motives. Climate refugees rise, glaciers melt, and still the machine churns. In this world, Marx isn't just about class struggle anymore. He's about survival. At the same time, new critiques emerge. Scholars revisit Marx's blind spots, his Eurocentrism, his sometimes naive faith in industrialization, his limited discussion of race and colonialism. Post-colonial thinkers, indigenous scholars, and black radicals remix Marx's tools to suit their contexts. Frantz Fanon, Cedric Robinson, Silvia Federici. They don't discard Marx, they challenge him, sharpen him. You listen in on these conversations. And it's clear Marx's work was never holy scripture. It was a toolbox. And tools evolve. In South America, indigenous movements fuse Marxist analysis with local cosmologies. In India, caste-based movements interrogate how class and hierarchy intertwine. In South Africa, land redistribution debates echo with Marxist undercurrents, though laced with painful legacies and unresolved injustice. And now, you float into the era of digital labor, the gig economy. You watch as workers juggle 5 jobs on 5 apps and still can't afford rent. You pass through Uber headquarters, where someone writes code to decide who gets a ride and someone else drives until 3 a.m. to survive. But who owns the platform? That question that's Marxist digital Marxism isn't just about factories anymore. It's about who owns your data, who profits from your content, who turns your attention span into stock value. People whisper terms like platform capitalism and digital serfdom while sharing stolen PDFs of capital on Discord. And amidst all of it, COVID, a pandemic, freezes the world. And suddenly, Marxist critiques aren't niche anymore. They're everywhere. Essential workers are hailed as heroes while getting underpaid and overexposed. Billionaires double their wealth while people die without ventilator. You remember the phrase from Marx's critique of the Gotha program, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. That line floats through Zoom classrooms, protest signs, and exhausted Twitter threads. A hope, a memory, a whispered plea, and yet there's no utopia in sight. Marxism remains fragmented. Online leftism often eats itself alive. Debates spiral. Purity tests burn bridges. Revolutions stay digital. Historians still argue whether the internet will liberate or enslave us further, whether Marxism can survive in a world of 8-second attention spans and algorithmic dopamine loops. But Yuya's still walking, still dreaming, because Marx, for all his flaws, was not a cynic. He believed in a world that could be built, not found, built. He believed that the way things are isn't the way they have to be, that we are not just cogs in a system, but architects of our collective future. He believed in waking up, and you're still listening. Now you move into a strange twilight of ideology, where everything seems both real and ridiculous, urgent and numb. It's the 2020s. You're scrolling through headlines that sound like dystopian satire, billionaires planning space colonies, landlords buying up neighborhoods through apps, and groceries being delivered by drones to people who can barely afford eggs. And somehow, Marx feels more present than ever. You sit in a quiet apartment, probably rented, probably overpriced, staring at the glow of your screen. You see debates rage not in salons or smoky cafes, but on live streams and comment threads, where leftists argue whether reform is possible or if it's time to just start over, burn it down, redistribute the ashes. But where is Marx now? He's nowhere and everywhere, quoted by some, misquoted by others, celebrated, demonized, memed, misunderstood. His ideas are used to explain everything from Amazon warehouse conditions to the psychology of burnout, to why your boss has 5 monitors and no empathy. Remember earlier when we said alienation has evolved? Well, now it's almost existential. It's not just that you don't control the means of production, it's that you're not even sure what's real anymore. You dream about having a job with meaning, but meaning itself feels automated. Your tasks are tracked by software. Your performance is ranked by AI. Your co-workers are Zoom icons. You haven't made eye contact in days. Karl Marx wouldn't know what an iPhone is, but he'd recognize this feeling. Still, not all is bleak. Marx's return in this decade isn't just cynical. There's imagination, too. From cooperatives to community gardens, from union drives at Starbucks to mutual aid networks that pop up faster than government support ever does. You feel that something is stirring again. Fringe tidbit. In 2021, Google searches for Karl Marx hit a 10-year high. More people were looking him up than Adam Smith. Make of that what you will. Historians still debate what that means. Is it a genuine ideological shift, or just the internet doing what it does, surfacing the old, remixing the radical, then forgetting it 2 weeks later? You pass by a picket line now. It's not 1917. It's a bunch of baristas with signs that say, "Solidarity is brewing." Cute, right? But also kind of powerful. People aren't just organizing factories anymore. They're organizing phone banks, food delivery services, YouTube networks. Labor isn't dead. It just wears sneakers now. You remember Marx's words, "The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains." And here, in this modern version, the chains might be credit card debt, impossible rent, or simply the grind of trying to make it in a world that keeps moving the finish line. But even as inequality grows and the planet warms, Marxism is no longer the rigid dogma it once appeared to be. It's flexible, intersectional, climate conscious, emotionally literate. You hear words like degrowth, decolonization, care economy. The ideas are rooted in Marx, but they're stretching out like tree roots, searching for new soil. You pass through classrooms where Marx is taught not as gospel, but as a foundation, something to build on, challenge, reimagine. Professors no longer preach. They facilitate debates. Students bring TikTok references into discussions about labor theory. It's absurd. It's fascinating. It's alive. In this era, there's no singular Marxism. There are Marxisms. You explore anarcho-communist, TikTok, eco-Marxist exines, socialist Twitch streamers debating billionaires in real time. You see people trying to make socialism trendy and occasionally succeeding, at least until the algorithm pivots to cat videos. But even memes leave residue. You see a cartoon of Marx on a skateboard saying, "Abolish landlords," and suddenly someone, somewhere, starts to ask questions. Why do we accept this as normal? And isn't that the point? Marx never promised utopia. He promised contradiction, struggle, and the chance to choose otherwise. So here you are, living in contradictions, A world where information is free, but rent is not. Where you can video call someone in Peru while paying $9 for a latte made by someone who can't afford health insurance. A world where alienation wears wireless earbuds, but also a world where solidarity still happens. Quietly, fiercely, daily. You walk through the remnants of history and feel the echoes. Paris, Petrograd, Havana, Soweto, Seattle, different revolutions, different results, but all lit by a similar spark. The refusal to accept things as they are. You might not have a manifesto in your back pocket, but you have questions, you have doubts, you have empathy, and that's enough. Because Marxism today isn't about converting people, it's about noticing who profits, who suffers, what would it take to live differently. You lie back on your couch, hearing the soft hum of your fridge, the occasional honk outside your window, and the buzz of distant news you're too tired to read. The questions are still there. They always will be. But so is the dream. A classless society, a life with dignity, a world where value isn't measured in profit margins. That dream, you're still in it. You drift now through the deepest layers, the part of the dream, where time folds in on itself and you begin to ask quieter questions, less about revolution, more about rest, less about storming the gates, more about what happens after. What happens after the barricades fall? After the bosses leave their offices? After the factories are run by the workers? After you've torn down the old world, what are you building in its place? Karl Marx didn't draw a blueprint for the perfect society that frustrates people. But it also frees you, because instead of a fixed design, he left behind a question. What would life look like if it were truly humane? So here you are, floating through the world you want not, the one you're stuck in. There are no private jets overhead. No one is homeless. No one is crushed by debt. There are jobs, sure, but they don't feel like jobs. They feel like participation. Contribution. You work fewer hours, because the purpose isn't profitized balance. And remember that word, alienation. It's gone now. You're not cut off from your labor. You bake bread and you know where the flour came from. You grow vegetables in a shared garden and nobody calls it side hustle. You rest and nobody calls you lazy. Fringe tidbit. Karl Marx once imagined a world where a person could hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner without ever becoming just a hunter, fisher, or critic. Sounds like a meme now, but it was serious. A playful vision of a life unboxed. In this dream world, healthcare isn't a maze of billing codes. Education isn't about student loans. Art doesn't need to go viral to be worth making. Historians still argue whether Marx's dream was utopian or simply naive. Could humans ever truly cooperate at scale without coercion? Could we live without hierarchy? Or would the same power games just sneak in through new doors? But here, in your quiet world of theory and dreams, you lean into the maybe. Because even if the path isn't clear, the desire is. You want a world that doesn't punish you for being poor, or tired, or different. A world where dignity isn't earned, it's assumed. You glide past libraries filled with books by Marx and by his critics. Schools where students debate old revolutions and invent new futures. You pass through a clinic where healthcare workers are paid well not because they generate revenue, but because they care. That's enough. You feel the absence of certain things: hunger, homelessness, humiliation. You feel the presence of others: joy, time, quiet, no ads interrupt your walk. No payday lenders, no one chasing quotas or bleeding from burnout. People smile not because they're selling something, but because they're not scared. And remember, exploitation. It's hard to find here. Not gone, perhaps because humans are complex. An ego doesn't vanish, but minimized, checked, watched. Workers have power. Decisions are made together. Not perfectly, but collectively. You overhear a conversation about supply chains that doesn't end in despair, about energy systems that don't boil the oceans, about relationships that aren't reduced to swipes and likes, and you breathe. In Marx's world, people would no longer be ruled by the dull compulsion of economic relations. You've lived that dullness, but now, in this imagined place, you feel it lifted. You're not hustling, you're living. There are no inspirational quotes on walls telling you to grind harder, no apps measuring your productivity, no guilt for taking a nap. You just are. And strangely, Marx anticipated this, not with exact detail, but in spirit. He wrote not just for the factory worker, but for the whole person, the poet, the daydreamer, the one who wants to play piano or plant tulips or just lie in the sun. You pass someone painting a mural on the side of a community bakery. It's abstract and weird and glorious. No one asks if it will sell. Marx didn't want a grey world of sameness. He wanted freedom. Real freedom. Not the capitalist version, you're free to starve, but freedom from fear, coercion, exploitation. You walk through that freedom now. And yeah, it's idealized. There are no supply shortages or bureaucracy. No one squabbling over who gets what. You know reality is messier, but it's worth dreaming, because sometimes dreams plant seeds, and somewhere in the world, someone wakes up, reads a paragraph in capital, and feels a flicker of recognition. Someone else starts a cope. Someone else votes for better housing. Someone else stops apologizing for being poor. You close your eyes, not in despair, but in possibility, because while Marx may have been buried in Highgate Cemetery, the questions he asked are still alive, and so is the hope. And now, as your eyes get heavier and your thoughts start to stretch like shadows at dusk, you drift into the last fold of this journey where theory dissolves into feeling, and all that's left is a quiet murmur of what might be. You find yourself in an imagined future, but this time it isn't grand or revolutionary, it's personal. You wake up in a room that's modest but warm. The sun filters through linen curtains. You don't need an alarm. You don't panic about bills. The kettle whistles. You make coffee not for the caffeine rush before a commute you resent, but because you enjoy the ritual. You step outside. The street hums, gently, not with engines and honking, but with conversation and laughter. There's no Uber driver trying to squeeze 3 more rides before lunch. No delivery cyclist running red lights to make the algorithm happy. Instead, neighbors share rides. Meals are exchanged, not sold. People see each other. Fringe detail, Marx and Engels once considered. Opening a newspaper in London focused entirely on worker stories. It never happened, but the dream lingers in the podcasts and collectives of today, where everyday people still try to make meaning without chasing clickbait. Historians still debate whether Marx would approve of all this modern softness. Therapy speak, the gentle parenting, the mutual aid spreadsheets. Maybe he'd grumble. Maybe he'd adapt. He always did admire resilience. You cross a square where old statues once stood, now replaced by sculptures that shift every season, chosen by the community. Nothing is permanent, and nothing has to be. There's a festival being set up. Kids with chalk, grandmothers handing out tamales, a teenager playing violin, off-key but earnest. Someone's organizing a discussion group, Marxism and memory, how we heal together. You pause, realizing that revolution doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like care, like a chair being pulled up for someone who used to be ignored, like a letter written by hand, like rest when the world told you not to. And here's the real twist. In this version of the future, you don't have to earn your place. You don't have to prove your productivity to be loved. You just exist, and that's enough. You remember something Marx wrote late in life, when his beard had gone grey and his body was tired. The true realm of freedom begins where labor ends. He wasn't glorifying laziness. He was honoring the right to simply be. You watch as a child draws a sun on the sidewalk. No irony, no sarcasm, just a sun. It's perfect. In the end, all the theory in the world can't replace that feeling. Not exploitation, not alienation, not revolution, just peace, just stillness, just the idea that maybe another world really is possible, and you've walked through history, through manifestos and misfires, through decades of rage and hope and everything in between, and now you're ready to sleep. So lie back, breathe, let the noise of the day drift away. Let the hum of possibility lull you deeper. No bosses here, no quotas, no ads, just you, just rest, just the quiet echo of a bearded philosopher whispering from the 19th century. You are not alone, you are not broken, and one day the dream might just wake up. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The world softens now, like evening light slipping through half-drawn curtains. Your breath slows, your body stills. No more factories, no more pamphlets, no more protest signs thudding in your chest. Only this gentle letting go. You've traveled far from dusty libraries to digital revolutions, from angry manifestos to soft, imagined futures. You've listened to a man who spent his life dissecting systems of control, but in these final moments, he asks you to put the books down. You don't need to debate anymore. You don't need to organize. Not tonight. Tonight your only task is to feel the bed beneath you, the coolness of the sheet, the air whispering past your cheek. Somewhere a faucet drips, a ceiling fan turns. The world keeps moving, but you, finally, don't have to. You've carried questions. You've wrestled with contradictions. You've walked through fire and theory and time. Now, let yourself step out of the circle, just for a while. Let your muscles release. Let your heart stop planning. There's no fight to win in this moment. Just a slow, rhythmic reminder. You are safe, you are worthy, and the dream of a gentler world, it lives in you. Now hush, dreamer. Rest easy, sleep well. Tomorrow can wait.